Section 81 Silver Hand. John had become a force that couldn't be ignored. Tang Mi had been appointed captain of the security team, and his subordinates included werewolves and wizards. One of the werewolves, Remus Lupin, gave John a strange sense of familiarity. Tang Mi had praised Lupin's excellence to him, but Lupin, unfortunately, seemed to be thinking of resigning. Back home a week later, John opened the basement. In his hands, the magic blood shimmered, periodically shifting into demi-guises of different colors. Having learned from the last time, he sealed the basement before anything could go wrong. He drank the magic blood, and that now familiar power rolled through him again. He tried to control it, but the overflow kept transforming the things in the cellar. Flames burst from his body and coalesced into ferocious dragons that roared non-stop. After some time, he looked as if he'd just been hauled out of deep water. He cast a scouring charm on himself, then checked his disillusionment charm. It had upgraded. What had been a level 4 charm was now level 5. Even Aurors rarely reached that. Perhaps only the elites could boast that level. Ding, magic blood. Obtain demiguise trait blessings, foresight, invisibility, insight, profit. Foresight, predict events that will happen within 10 minutes. Invisibility, greatly increases stealth. Insight, enhances vision and sensitivity. Profit, awakens prophetic talent, may probabilistically trigger prophecies. John stared at the list. 4 traits again, like with the dragon last time. He lingered on the last one, Prophet, astonished to have gained such an extraordinary ability. The most famous prophecy in the magical world, of course, was Sybil Trelawney's. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. That prophecy had set Voldemort's course and, by doing so, made Harry Potter's survival, his becoming the chosen one, possible. Divination, he thought, had turned out to be the right choice. Curious, John tried out foresight. Colorful light filled his eyes and scenes rushed past. Just as the vision was ending, he saw Watson Wick screaming. "Dad is in trouble," he muttered, his stomach dropping. He opened the basement door. Watson had been crouched against it, eavesdropping. When the door swung open, he tumbled in. To save face, he pretended nothing had happened, nonchalantly unwrapping a chocolate frog and popping it into his mouth. "John, did you make anything new this time?" he asked, eyes darting into the cellar. John's conjured owl from earlier had been the subject of Watson's boasting for weeks. When Watson caught sight of the lifelike large dog standing there, his face lit up. "John, can we put this in the living room as a decoration?" "Yes," John said, distracted. He couldn't shake the image of Watson screaming from his mind. He watched Watson struggle to move the dog upstairs and followed behind, uneasy. 10 minutes passed and nothing happened. John worried he'd misread the vision. Then Watson, still chewing a chocolate frog, felt a sharp pain in his tooth. He had bitten down too hard. A scream rang out through the house, exactly the scene John had seen. But it wasn't just a tongue bite. Watson had a cavity. Mrs. Wick took one look and sneered with a mix of scorn and annoyance. "Aren't you supposed to have an iron stomach?" she said. Watson, stubborn as ever, pointed to his mouth. "How does a cavity have anything to do with my stomach?" he protested. Mrs. Wick pinched his swollen cheek until he screamed again. "It'll have to be pulled," she said bluntly, rolling her eyes. He wasn't a child, yet this had happened to him. John suppressed a smile, surveying the mountain of chocolate frog wrappers in the utility room. "Dad, you brought this on yourself," he said. Mrs. Wick's frosty manner made sense now. Watson needed to go to the dentist to have the tooth extracted. Dentistry in Europe was notoriously profitable. Rumor had it a successful dentist could buy a golf course after retiring. Since the pain was getting worse, Mrs. Wick drove Watson to have it pulled. John went along because he was planning to go to Nocturne Alley anyway. "Old Dutton's clinic passed back there," Watson muttered as they drove. "Shut up. You were the one comparing Old Dutton to a sheep slasher," Mrs. Wick shot back. Watson went immediately on alert at his wife's tone. When they passed Old Dutton's clinic, he instinctively clutched his pocket. Mrs. Wick's expression was impatient and determined, unlike her usual composed demeanor. Watson shifted awkwardly and pulled out a fashion magazine. A Louis Vuitton spread made him sigh. A root canal wasn't the problem. Shopping was. The car stopped on Oxford Street, and Watson resigned himself. His wallet was doomed. Mrs. Wick stepped out in high heels and clicked away, leaving father and son alone. Let's just find a clinic that can pull the tooth, Watson grumbled as he fumbled into the driver's seat. Are you sure you can drive? John asked. Then you drive. Or use your magic to pull it, Watson shot back, thinking he could rely on his son to fix the mess. They drove around London until they found a modest clinic with a tidy waiting area. The sign read, Granger Dental Clinic. John couldn't help but notice the surname and think of Hermione. If he'd had his phone, he'd have sent her a picture. The waiting room was small, a few children and adults scattered about. One child's crying irritated the room. A lone young woman in the waiting area took one look at Watson's steady, gentlemanly appearance and lit up. She leaned close and cooed, Your child is so handsome. Did he eat too much candy? She'd recently divorced and was determined not to remain alone. A steady, attractive man like Watson was just her sort. Watson didn't respond. The woman shifted her attention to John, trying a different approach. Handsome young man, your dad doesn't seem to be in a great mood today. John glanced at her coolly. If you had a cavity, you wouldn't be so chatty either, he said. At that moment, Mr. Granger walked in. Seeing the young woman, he looked mildly put out, but when he saw John, his face brightened. I remember you, John, right? Do you remember me? I'm Hermione's father. Mr. Granger moved over with an easy, genial air. He wasn't the typical balding middle-aged man. His thick hair explained where Hermione got hers. Are you here to see Hermione? He asked. John smiled and bowed slightly. Hello, Mr. Granger. No, I'm not here for Hermione. My dad has a cavity. He indicated Watson, who looked pale and miserable, his mouth aching as if a woodpecker were drilling away at his tooth. Mr. Granger's face softened. He ushered them inside with an enthusiastic, relieved air, as though he'd been waiting for the distraction. The young woman in the waiting room watched them go with a wistful look. Good men, she thought, always seemed to belong to someone else. Once inside, Mr. Granger leaned in conspiratorially. She comes here every day to flirt with me, he confessed, glancing about guiltily. Don't tell my wife. She's very particular about these things. Watson patted his shoulder and nodded in sympathetic solidarity. What can you do? Sometimes being too much of a gentleman is a problem, he said with a wry smile. The two men shared a laugh and an instant camaraderie, a small, unexpected kinship sealed in a dental clinic waiting room. John glanced at the two old men together and rolled his eyes. They were so wrapped up in each other, positively narcissistic. Dad, does your tooth still hurt? He asked, unable to stand their easy camaraderie any longer. Watson covered his cheek. It hurts. It hurts so much. Mr. Granger was crouched over him, working carefully at the offending tooth. While they fussed, John drifted around the clinic to kill time. He picked up a newspaper and skimmed the headlines about Russia. The great power fractured and in turmoil. John muttered, Looks like Grandpa's been dragged into this mess too. His grandfather had some influence in the area, likely because officials had courted him to stabilize local tensions. John shook his head and looked down at the paper. A familiar bush of brown hair suddenly bobbed into view. Hermione, eyes bright, had seen him and came over at once. John! She was still clutching a book so thick it was ridiculous. She dropped it on the table with a dull thud. What are you doing here? You should have told me. Hermione gave a small, put-out frown. She'd invited a few friends over, but none of them, Muggle or Wizard, had shown up. She admitted, with a little sigh, that she envied the Weasleys' burrow. That family was always interesting. John pointed to his father on the dentist chair. My dad ate too much chocolate and now has a cavity. If you have a Darman Alex Bilby Wizard card, you might want to give it to him. Hermione blinked. Sometimes she wondered how Mr. Wick had produced a son like John. Never mind that. Are you going to start pre-studying next year's textbooks? Hermione only ever put books down when she was off on an adventure. Her eyes sparkled with the assumption that John must be preparing months in advance. John wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and coughed awkwardly. Actually, some things don't need to be, well, so urgent. Even with his enhancements, he couldn't study 18 hours a day. Gryffindor's top students terrified him with their diligence. He smiled and added, Knowledge is all connected. Once you understand the levitation charm, you'll pick up Accio much faster. To demonstrate, He took a few wilting lilies from a vase and breathed a little magic into them. The petals straightened and brightened. The flowers seemed to bloom anew. He handed them to Hermione with a half-proud, half-amused chuckle. Magic is the root. Learn the basics, and everything else becomes simpler. Hermione accepted the lilies, a little hesitant, and teased, "So can history of magic be simplified too?" John hesitated, then laughed. "Probably not." Hermione's mouth twitched with a smile. She'd been intentionally derailing the conversation. John ground his teeth, realizing he'd been played. Watson emerged from the dentist's room, much improved, and seemed suddenly intimate with Mr. Granger. The two older men were chatting and laughing like schoolboys. "John, I'm going to stay in London a few days," Watson announced. "Wendell invited me to play golf." They were even using each other's first names now. John watched them, half suspicious that some late-life romance might be brewing, half relieved that his father would be staying in London for a while, freeing John up to go where he liked. Nocturne Alley, in particular, had been on his mind. Johnny Silverhand's store had popped up last year, and in a short time eclipsed Borgin and Burke's. Mundungus Fletcher strutted about as if he were the owner, though he was quick to take credit and even quicker to grumble. His biggest annoyance was Tangmi Shelby, the airborne security captain who never gave him any face. Mundungus had long dreamed of getting Tangmi out of the way. Tangmi only gave him a cold look. Mundungus, all brash bluster, shouted, "Shelby, you stinker, get out of there." A visitor slipped in through the door. Mundungus, still fuming, turned to glare, and then froze. The newcomer wore a silver mask and ornate green robes with lace trim, a tailored waistcoat and a gold watch chain gleaming. Mundungus squinted. The voice that came from behind the mask was cool, mocking. "What do you want?" Mundungus snapped back. "If you're not buying anything, get out of my store." "Your store? You seem to have forgotten whose place this is," the masked figure said, and Mundungus's eyes went wide. "Are you Mr. Johnny Silverhand?" he blurted. "It seems you remember me, Mundungus," said the man, and as he leaned close, Mundungus could see fierce, dragon-like eyes through the mask. A pressure fell over the room. Mundungus's bravado evaporated. He stumbled back and dropped to his knees. "Esteemed Mr. Silverhand, Mundungus Fletcher offers his deepest apologies." The arrogance that had been puffing him up minutes before vanished in the face of Johnny Silverhand's presence. Sweat beaded at Mundungus's nose. He babbled, voice shaking, "Mr. Silverhand, it was all a misunderstanding." John walked into the shop as if he owned the place. The security team tensed. They were a mix of seasoned fighters, several of them were werewolves, and they could all sense how dangerous this man was. Tangmi strode forward and bowed. "Welcome back, Mr. Silverhand," he said with genuine respect. Tangmi had been the only one to have seen Johnny's true face before, so he'd handled most of the contacts. Now that Johnny had returned, everyone came forward to meet him. The security force had grown to 10, the original 4 werewolves plus a new unit led by Remus Lupin and 4 retired aurors. Together, they were almost as capable as regular aurors. Mundungus even produced last year's ledger. "Esteemed Mr. Silverhand, this is the income. Most of it is in Gringotts, some's in the warehouse for purchases." John glanced through the books. He knew Mundungus was greedy. "Mundungus, I don't want you to be erased from Johnny Silverhand's forever," he said simply. Mundungus's face crumpled. "Mr. Silverhand, I swear I didn't." "Spare me your oath," John said, voice flat. An invisible force tugged Mundungus forward. A hand closed around his throat, feet left the floor. When he fumbled for his wand, it was snatched away. The air tightened in his lungs. Panic and the fear of death scrambled his thoughts. "Enough, Mr. Silverhand," Remus Lupin snapped, stepping forward with his wand already drawn. "You should let him go." Tangmi leveled a wand back. "Remus, know your place," he said quietly. John's reply was cold. "Do you know where the money he embezzled has gone?" He let the accusation hang. Lupin's face shifted. He lowered his wand a fraction. John tightened his grip. Mundungus choked, eyes bulging, his whole body convulsing. "I left a fund for every young wizard who was cursed and persecuted," John said. "With that fund, poor young werewolves could afford a bottle of wolfsbane every month." Lupin's expression crumpled as understanding and anger washed across his face. John's hand squeezed harder. "This man embezzled most of that fund. Do you know what that means?" Remus opened his mouth, then slowly put his wand down. Mundungus managed a strangled plea. Seeing Lupin back off, he lost what little hope he'd had. He hadn't imagined Johnny Silverhand would see through his tricks, nor had he counted on the hatred in the eyes of the werewolves around him. Lupin had been a werewolf since childhood. He knew the prejudice they faced, the way even finding a job was almost impossible. Every nut Mundungus stole tightened that noose. The hand finally released. Mundungus collapsed to the floor, gasping, body twitching, greedily sucking in air. John's voice, cool and indifferent, cut through the room. "This is the first time, Mundungus. Consider yourself warned. I expect everything returned." "I understand, Mr. Silverhand. I'll return it all immediately," Mundungus wheezed, crawling to John's leg and clinging to it, swearing he would make good. It had been a display of exquisite, wandless magic, and of a power that left the room shivering with respect and a little fear. Mundungus had only one thought: keep his job. The Aurors, who had been so dismissive before, suddenly understood why Tang Mi, of all people, spoke so highly of Mr. Silverhand. They swallowed their arrogance and stood humbled. John's decisive move, making an example to warn the rest, had cowed them all. Young Jin Ledisley watched John with something like awe. He had been recruited by Mundungus and owed him the usual loyalty of boss and underling, but Johnny Silverhand was different. Jin had never expected anyone to throw open their vaults for those cursed young wizards. That kind of largesse filled the upright Jin Ledisley with admiration. He was only a temp, but he felt he could learn much from Mr. Silverhand. Leading a team required both tenderness and strength. Giving wolfsbane freely to underage werewolves was tenderness. Disciplining Mundungus was strength. Nocturne Alley was never quiet. No sooner had John sorted out the embezzlement and announced ownership of the shop than trouble arrived. A rough, smelly gang pushed through the main door. Leather, grime, a biker gang look. Lupin saw their leader and inhaled sharply. He struggled to keep calm. Tang Mi stood at John's left and murmured, "Fenrir Greyback. He runs the werewolf crowd. He has his eye on the wolfsbane." Those few words made everything clear. John rested his hand on the wand at his waist. This group meant trouble. He glanced at Lupin's tight breathing. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Lupin hadn't expected John to notice. He closed his eyes, drew himself together, and said, "Fenrir bit me when I was 4. He's a monster who goes after children." John's eyes narrowed. There was nothing more contemptible in any society than someone who hurt children. Fenrir swaggered into the shop and demanded, "I want to see your owner." John stepped forward, flat and cool. "You'd better have a very good reason." "So it's you," Fenrir sneered, "the legendary Silverhand." He sniffed at John like a dog. John's height made him stand out, but nothing else seemed remarkable until Fenrir's voice turned hungry. "Give me the wolfsbane, or I'll rip your throat out." Fenrir was a vicious piece of work, known for biting children, raising them on hatred, recruiting them as thugs. He stole and killed for food and would attack outside the full moon. Threatening a shopkeeper was routine for him. A cold smile showed under John's mask. "You're mistaken," he said slowly. Fenrir's frown deepened. John closed the distance between them. "Only the strong may lord it over the weak," he said softly. Fenrir bared his fangs and lunged for John's neck. There was a scream and the sound of flesh tearing. An ear flew to the floor. Fenrir clutched at the bloody stump. John's right hand held a dagger that flashed coldly. "I want you dead," he hissed. Fenrir charged in blind rage. John stepped aside, and with lightning speed, the dagger left 7 neat holes in Fenrir's body. Fenrir fell to his knees. John casually wiped the blade and ordered, "Pick up your ear. Don't let your blood stain my floor." Fenrir howled, an animal sound, and his 4 companions answered in kind. They rushed John. Lupin raised his wand, but Tang Mi put a hand on his arm. Lupin saw the confidence in her face and lowered his own doubts. John, still composed, said, "I told you, don't dirty my floor." He drew his wand with the flourish of a conductor's baton. With a quick transfiguration, the benches by the door became 2 large dogs that leapt and bit 2 attackers. A levitation charm unbalanced another werewolf and pinned him to the ceiling. A banishing charm sent a 4th crashing through the shopfront. Fenrir's teeth were nearly at John's throat when a fireball erupted over his body. One of the werewolves struggled up, and John leveled his wand. Crucio. The unforgivable curse hit that werewolf, and he writhed in a scream of unbearable pain. Lupin's chest tightened, but the other wizards around them showed no surprise. Nocturne Alley had long since seen worse. John twirled his own yew-wand and kept the creature writhing on the floor. Flames had singed Fenrir's fur, but he still lived. His vitality was frightening. With a flick, John turned strips of the floor into iron chains that clamped around Fenrir. John walked to Lupin. "He bit you," he said quietly. "I'll leave him in your hands." Lupin was torn. He hated Fenrir and wanted him punished. But he also needed his own future. He wanted Fenrir in Azkaban, not dead, so it wouldn't ruin his path to Hogwarts. John saw the conflict in his face and sighed. "You're too straight, Lupin." Then John raised his wand and spoke an incantation Lupin had never heard. "Soul, come back." It was a spell Lupin would never forget. Fenrir screamed as white smoke billowed from his body, and a silver, translucent double, his soul, floated free. Fenrir's body went limp, motionless. The soul, bewildered, hovered before John. The wand in John's hand felt like a blade. A howl cut through the room as John ran his wand across the ghostly arms, and the soul screamed with raw, soul-deep agony. The scene chilled every wizard who watched. The sound made hair stand on end. After a long, unbearable 3 minutes, Fenrir's 2 soul arms were gone. John waved his wand, and the soul sank back into the body. The flesh remained, but the arms never returned. "Mr. Silverhand." Lupin's voice was dry. He could not speak for a long time. Even Tang Mi, who had seen much, was shaken. None of them could have imagined a schoolboy possessing such a terrifying and absolute charm. John's expression was flat. "2 arms as the price," he said. "I don't think they'll come back to bother the neighborhood." He snapped his fingers. The 2 arms dissolved into white smoke and vanished. Fenrir's companions were prostrate on the floor, cowed like puppies. John stepped to one and spoke quietly. "Who sent you?" The werewolf trembled. John's wand pressed briefly to his forehead, and the creature began to sweat and stammer. "It was Sean Shafiq," he cried. "Shafiq," John repeated. "The pure bloods have started paying attention to this place." He pocketed his wand. "Lock them up. I'm sure someone will be interested to see them," he told Tang Mi. She bowed and had them secured in the cellar dungeon. By midnight, Aurors came knocking at the Silverhand Johnny door. The leader was Rufus Scrimgeour, gruff and lion-like, the head of the Auror office, bringing a chain of posted warrants behind him. "First time meeting you, Mr. Johnny Silverhand," Scrimgeour said, offering a hand. John, face masked, took it with a short laugh. "Rufus Scrimgeour, I hope you like my little present." Scrimgeour's smile was difficult to conceal. "You've helped us before," he hinted. "I don't forget favors," John replied lightly. "Rufus, do you happen to know where Sean Shafiq is?" "Sean Shafiq?" Scrimgeour frowned. "Mr. Silverhand, I hope you're not going to make me play favorites." "The 28 sacred families are rare creatures," John said as if speaking about some roadside clinic. Scrimgeour's eyes flickered. "All right, I'll tell you where the Shafiq Manor is." Using a pureblood family as bait, they had come to an understanding. The recent Hagrid affair had shown Scrimgeour how deep Johnny Silverhand's connections ran. If someone with a Merlin first-class medal could maneuver on a half-giant's behalf, their reach must be considerable. Scrimgeour wanted to climb higher, and Johnny Silverhand might be the leverage. Shafiq Manor sat out in the suburbs. The Shafiqs scorned muggles. Sean Shafiq, who oversaw the family estates, scowled at the vault ledger in front of him, far fewer galleons than expected. The patriarch, thin-faced with a hanging beard over his robes, did not look like a man of brute strength. He was the sort who guided others with his mind. One of his profitable ventures was Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley, and all of that investment seemed to be going to ruin the day the Silverhand Johnny shop opened its doors. Section 84, Chapter 97, The Unrivaled and Shafiq's Concession. Sean Shafiq was furious. He didn't care about Borgin and Burke's. He cared about his galleons. He had planned to recoup his losses by buying the shop back, only to discover that Mundungus had beaten him to it. That shady thief had spent thousands of galleons to take over the place, and worse, had handed over all the Shafiq family's dark arts artifacts. Sean wanted to kill the short, fat man. "The werewolf had better tear Mundungus's throat out," he snarled. "And that damn Johnny, no matter if he kneels and licks my shoes, I won't let him go." His face twisted. The house elves dared not approach and slipped away to tidy in silence. A crack echoed from somewhere in the room, and Sean snapped, "You clumsy house elf! I'll shove your hands into the fireplace." He stormed out into a dark room. Despite his stinginess, he would never be so cheap as to go without lighting candles, yet the candles stayed unlit. Two figures stood in the gloom. One sat, one stood. Sean's mind raced. The Shafiq Manor was protected by wards. For anyone to get in so silently could mean trouble. He tried to rouse the portraits on the wall, but the previous head of the family hung there, sound asleep. No matter how loudly he shouted, the portraits did not stir. The house elves who usually bore his bullying remained indifferent. The manor was eerily still. The two watched him without haste. The man on the sofa, which could have been called a throne, touched the emerald ring on his left hand, then raised a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. "Shh! Be quiet." Sean's palms went clammy. He lunged first, gripping the eagle head of his cane and drawing it to strike. "Stupefy," he barked. "Expelliarmus," came another voice. Both spells rang out at once. A red light hit Sean and his wand flew from his hand. Before it could hit the floor, it veered and landed in the hand of the silver-masked man. Sean's eyes widened. The man hadn't used a wand. This was exquisite wandless magic. He didn't remember facing anyone so powerful. "That was then," the silver-masked man said. "Johnny Silverhand says hello." Johnny casually stroked the wand's handle, an elm wand painted silver. Sean's cheapness showed through at a glance. With a light squeeze, the painted handle snapped. Johnny picked up the broken wand, pointed it at Sean without effort, and said coldly, "You shouldn't have targeted my shop, Sean Shafiq." "I don't know what you mean," Sean snapped. "It doesn't matter. I don't need your answer." Johnny tilted his head, his gaze boring through Sean as if through a mask and into his gut. It felt predatory. The other figure, a man in a white mask, stepped forward and respectfully offered, "Sir, I can do it for you." "You may," Johnny replied without a flicker of emotion. Sean tried to play his last card. "I am pureblood," he hissed. "You cannot harm a pureblood. The Ministry of Magic won't stand for it." Being pureblood wasn't the same as being a petty dark wizard from Nocturne Alley. The Ministry couldn't be expected to ignore an attack on a member of the Sacred 28. Sean thought that threat would protect him, but he was wrong. The white-masked man drew his wand and grinned with cruel satisfaction. "Crucio!" Pain shut Sean's mouth. He collapsed, writhing like a fish on a beach. Johnny toyed with the elm wand and chuckled. "We both know how clever people are, don't we?" The first wave of pain subsided. Sean's gaunt face drained completely of color. He trembled, lips quivering. "I will destroy your shop," he spat. "Persistent," Johnny mused, leaning back against the sofa. The white-masked man raised his wand again. The second bout of agony lasted a full half-hour. When it finally stopped, Johnny took a small instrument from his pocket and pressed it to Sean's wand, a tiny device or charm he had developed, a trace. He gave a single gesture to the white-masked man to halt. Sean lay in a sweat puddle, terror written on his face, his cunning gone. "What do you want, then?" he gasped. Johnny's voice was low, tinged with disappointment. "What I should be asking you, Sean. Tell me, what did you think you were doing?" Sean was bewildered by the question. "I won't kneel to you," he blustered. "Hand over all your properties in Nocturne Alley. That will be your punishment." "I see." Johnny's voice carried a chill. "Third time's the charm. Your choice, death or submission?" Sean understood finally. Johnny wasn't asking for an apology. He wanted submission. As head of the Shafiq family, one of the Sacred 28, Sean roared, "Impossible!" "Such a pity." Johnny's tone deepened. "Return, soul." White smoke began to seep from Sean's skin. He clawed at it in horror, but could not stop it. His soul was being drawn out, bit by bit. Sean screamed. Johnny stepped forward and carved a sigil over the spot where Sean's soul's heart would be, then pressed a command in his ear. "Leave here, Sean Shafiq, and never return." Sean's soul could not move. The mark burned like a brand. His screams rose high and thin. Johnny finally pushed Sean's soul back into its body, pressing down until it snapped into place. Sean tore at his chest, no wound there, but an internal burn as if a red-hot iron had been thrust into him. His wand fell from his loosening fingers. Johnny turned and walked away, his back to Sean. The furious old man snatched up his wand and tried to fire, but his arm wouldn't rise. His lips could not form a curse. He pointed a dark curse wildly at the sofa, a pathetic bluff. Pain exploded across his head and through his heart as if a blade had been driven in. He staggered across the cheap carpet and looked in a mirror, tearing open his shirt. A line of letters appeared along his chest. Unrivaled. He stared. There was no physical mark, no wound, but the word glowed in his mind and on his soul. Sean collapsed again, and for the first time since dawn, he lost the ability even to swear at Johnny Silverhand. "No," he howled, smashing whatever he could in a final hysterical fit before blacking out. Inside the Shafiq manor, the guards lay knocked out and the loyal house elves were hidden under beds. Outside, Remus Lupin and 3 security team members watched the house with growing unease. For a while, nothing moved. Then the sound of smashing came from inside, and Johnny Silverhand descended the steps flanked by the white-masked man, Tang Mi. "It's settled," Johnny said matter-of-factly as he passed Lupin. Sean Shafiq was very generous. He volunteered all his properties in Nocturne Alley as a gift. Lupin had no idea what Johnny had done to that old vulture, but it had not been pleasant. The young shop assistant who had come along, Jin Lettisley, hurried to keep up and asked, feigning curiosity, "Sir, how did you get the Shafiqs to concede?" Johnny paused, amusement flickering across his voice. "I gave him an offer he couldn't refuse." Jin frowned, trying to imagine what could have been so tempting to make an ancient pure-blood family yield. Tang Mi, who had assisted, angled his face away and sighed inwardly. If never being able to look Johnny Silverhand in the eye counted as tempting, then the offer had indeed been irresistible. Tang Mi also felt a private gratitude that he was not a rigid Auror. Dealing with his boss as an enemy would be terrifying. The spell Johnny had used on Sean, extracting and marking a soul without leaving visible scars, was more sinister than even the worst curses. It left no bodily marks, but it owned a man's fate. Once they stepped out of the anti-apparition zone, Johnny placed his hand on Tang Mi's shoulder. Tang Mi had wanted to grumble. Johnny used spells like that, and still, somehow, couldn't apparate? It made him wonder if apparition was really so hard to master. With a flick of his wand, Tang Mi apparated away with Johnny. The others followed, assuming their boss was simply too casual to apparate himself. After all, for someone so powerful to claim he couldn't feel a bit like posturing. By the next day, the Shafiq family had withdrawn from Nocturne Alley. All their properties were now owned by Johnny Silverhand's specialty shop. The Shafiqs abandoned London altogether and moved abroad to a turbulent country. Some said they wanted to profit from Muggle unrest. Others whispered the old vulture sought a political career, maybe even a run for Minister of Magic. Whatever the truth, Nocturne Alley had changed hands. The former king of Nocturne Alley had gone overseas, and a new king, Johnny Silverhand, sat on the throne. The factions that had once coveted him quietly retreated. Even Rufus Scrimgeour, who had expected a long, ugly fight, was stunned. One night, just one night, and the Shafiq family had folded? He snorted at the rumors. No one knew better than he did how extensive old vulture Sean Shafiq's operations in Nocturne Alley were. Nothing of that size would be abandoned lightly. The only explanation was exile. Mr. Silverhand Johnny, who had appeared out of nowhere, had, in a single night, driven one of the 28 sacred families out. Rufus found himself reevaluating his whole approach to the new king of Nocturne Alley. Johnny Silverhand was already becoming a legend. Chapter 98, Lucius and the Silverhand, Letter. Malfoy Manor had been tense lately. Lucius Malfoy was not doing well. He had bullied the other Hogwarts governors into signing a notice that suspended Dumbledore, and after Dumbledore returned, Lucius had been kicked off the school board. That blow alone was bad for the family. Far worse was the fate of the Malfoy's dark arts collection. Almost every old pureblood house had 2 constants, house elves and a cache of dark artifacts. In the Malfoys' case, the latter were plentiful, relics collected through generations, many tied to the family's former allegiance to Voldemort. Voldemort had never fully trusted Lucius, yet he'd shown him favors because of family lineage and those artifacts. Now Arthur Weasley was watching Malfoy Manor closely, and Lucius still didn't know Draco had already exposed the cellar where the dark arts items were hidden. He lived in fear that one day Arthur would burst through Malfoy's gates and haul the whole family off to Azkaban. He wanted to sell the artifacts, But Borgin and Burke's, the shop that had once been his safety valve, was gone. Sean Shafiq might have bought them before, but Shafiq himself had been driven out. Lucius considered selling to anyone who would take the stash, but he knew Shafiq's breed, greedy enough to undercut him until there was no profit at all. "Damn Weasley, damn Potter," Lucius muttered, slamming his fist against the stair rail. "Nobody needs you falling apart," Narcissa said coolly, raising her chin. Arthur could arrive any moment. Lucius had to rein in his temper at his wife's presence. He gripped the banister instead, furious and impotent. "We have to hide the artifacts or sell them, Narcissa. Don't show weakness in front of Draco." She watched their son through the window as he practiced, different now after the scandal at Hogwarts. Where he used to lean on his parents, Draco had hardened, throwing charms at a humanoid target as if it were Harry Potter himself. Even Crabbe and Goyle had been reduced to sparring partners. Narcissa, pleased by Draco's change, came to comfort Lucius. "We must try," she said. "I don't want our son to grow up with a father in Azkaban." Lucius' expression flickered. At that moment, a long-eared black owl arrived and dropped a letter on the windowsill. Lucius glanced at it, but didn't reach for it. He thought Dobby would bring it. He then remembered Harry's tricks, stomped across the floor, and snatched it for himself. The seal was unmistakable, black wax stamped with a silver handprint, the mark of Johnny Silverhand. A chill ran through him. He'd just been thinking about where to turn, and now Johnny Silverhand had sent him an offer. They opened it together. The letter was succinct and startling. Johnny Silverhand would provide a place to hide the Malfoys' dark arts artifacts. He would also help Lucius regain a position on the Hogwarts board. Both propositions were dangerous. Why would Johnny Silverhand risk sheltering a Death Eater? Why help someone so compromised? Lucius and Narcissa exchanged troubled looks. "Do you know Johnny Silverhand?" Narcissa asked. "We've never met," Lucius replied, fingers tracing the silver print. They sat with the letter and the possibilities. For Lucius, there was the fear of being exposed and sent to Azkaban. For Narcissa, the need to protect their son. Neither could understand Johnny's motives. Lucius hesitated, because accepting help from someone with influence in Nocturne Alley was a gamble that could cost everything. Downstairs, Draco continued to practice, convinced more than ever of one thing: true glory came from one's own strength. His transformation, harder, more focused, pleased his mother and unnerved his father. Meanwhile, in Nocturne Alley, the new shop's tills rang like a bell. The little wizard fund had been bled dry before, and Mundungus's sudden prosperity felt like a knife. Having seen Johnny Silverhand's power, the wizards who had once bowed to the Shafiqs now freely did business in Johnny's store. Turnover quadrupled in weeks. Gin Lettisley maintained a relentless, brilliant smile as galleons clinked constantly. John had set up an office and sat surrounded by letters. "You've done well, Riddle," he murmured, stroking the long-eared owl and feeding it a dried fish. Most letters were cautious inquiries from Nocturne Alley denizens about the new rules. Where Sean Shafiq had left a complex web, Johnny's rule was straightforward: cooperate or be crushed. Some resisted. In those cases, John dispatched a silver hand letter, a bland condolence on the surface, a large silver handprint beneath, and an implicit threat. Recipients either came to show goodwill the next day or vanished from Nocturne Alley. The letter had become an ironclad diplomatic tool. One missive from Malfoy Manor made the corners of John's mouth lift. Lucius Malfoy was sensible, John thought, but the Death Eater angle had to be handled with finesse. Lucius had always been an opportunist, a man who swaggered when Voldemort was strong and disavowed him when it was safer. He defected and returned as circumstances dictated. Those most loyal to Voldemort had paid for it. The rest had survived by bowing to power. John mused that Lucius's variable loyalty could be useful. The Silverhand identity now carried influence, and John thought beyond Nocturne Alley. Diagon Alley was the real prize, the hub every witch and wizard visited. Putting on his mask, John descended to the shop floor. Customers bowed in fear and respect when they saw it. Aurors monitoring from a distance noted the birth of a new, more troublesome figure in the alley, someone sharper, more decisive than Sean Shafiq. Chapter 99, Apparition and the Daily Prophet. The 3 Ds, Tangmi Shelby instructed: destination, determination, deliberation. When you apparate, focus on where you want to be. Be absolutely determined to occupy that space and move deliberately. John had never taken apparition lightly. Tang Mi, a practiced auror, rated John's level around 5. In this untamed training ground, John was learning the intricacies, apparition and disapparition, the act of leaving one point and arriving at another. Both had to be mastered. Get either wrong and you risked splinching. John glanced at his hand and then looked away, still feeling the sting. He'd had a ring finger depart on its own during a jump, an embarrassing but instructive splinch. Tang Mi applied Dittany with steady hands, murmuring as the herb healed. The auror had been playing the stern tutor, but there was a softness under his discipline. If Tang Mi hadn't become an auror, he joked quietly as he worked, he might have been a fine teacher at Hogwarts. 86, Section 86. With his finger reattached, John wiggled it. This kind of splitting doesn't feel like being cut, he muttered. It's more like being forced through a narrow pipe and squeezed out the other side. Apparition had always been unpleasant beyond mere inconvenience. After many tries, apparition finally appeared on John's spell list. Not wanting to risk further splitting while leveling up, he spent a free point to upgrade it. Level 2 apparition felt completely different. He tested it at once. Apparition can't be rushed, he said aloud. It took me weeks to succeed even once. Remember the 3 Ds. Tang Mi was still murmuring when a sharp pop cracked in his ears. He stared in shock as John reappeared 100 meters away, intact. John felt a little dizzy from the landing, but it was within acceptable limits. There was no sign of splitting. He had learned the spell. He tried it again and appeared beside Tang Mi. The landing was slightly off, but accurate enough. Tang Mi, dumbfounded, watched him. John smiled. What were you saying? Nothing, Tang Mi stammered. Only then did Tang Mi realize the gulf between an ordinary wizard and a prodigy. He'd split more than a dozen times in his life, once almost losing a leg. John, by contrast, had suffered only a minor split and had mastered level 2 apparition in a single day. Tang Mi couldn't help feeling envious. With apparition mastered, John no longer had to commute by car. The flu network at Mundungus's nearby house was blocked, probably because Mundungus owed too much. Mundungus was always stingy. Even with a salary of 300 galleons, he put on the appearance of a beggar. Wizards and their tastes. Glancing at Tang Mi, John realized the man needed new clothes. The patched garments he wore were hardly fitting for someone associated with the Silverhand Johnny store. Tang Mi had been poor for years. After he became a werewolf, he often couldn't even afford food. John arranged for fresh clothes for him and sent outfits for the security team as well. The former ragged crew instantly looked like runway models. Remus Lupin, who had been on the verge of resigning, received some too. John showed no favoritism. Lupin was deeply moved. Lupin had once received an invitation to help a little longer, but he delayed resigning just to get another wolfsbane potion. The market supply couldn't compare to the internal stock at Silverhand Johnny. Lupin needed every bottle he could get to keep his wits while teaching at Hogwarts. As a fellow werewolf, Tang Mi ignored Lupin's secrecy and gave him his blessing. "Thank you, Mr. Silverhand," Lupin said quietly. John knew werewolves struggled to keep other jobs. He told Mundungus, prepare 3 bottles of the best wolfsbane potion for him. Those 3 bottles were a parting gift. John didn't ask where Lupin was going. He lived by his own rules. Those who left him got something, but those who stayed made far more. Lupin was grateful. Of all the places he'd worked, only John had treated werewolves like colleagues. An owl dropped a copy of the Daily Prophet on John's desk. The top headline shouted that Diagon Alley had a new king, and the columnist was Rita Skeeter, never shy of hyperbole. In her piece, she called Johnny Silverhand the second king, comparing him to a similarly grand figure beneath the Ministry of Magic. "She certainly writes well," John muttered, skimming the article. Rita's imagination had run wild. She wrote of John chopping people up and feeding them to dragons, of Nifflers stealing from Gringotts. "She's the next Lockhart," he joked to himself as he read on. He laughed as Rita promised an exclusive, a teaser to unmask the true face of the second king, Johnny Silverhand. Is there a faceless man or a living corpse beneath the mask? Stay tuned. John blinked. Exclusive? Unmasking? He had no idea he'd accepted any interview. Rita probably just invented the whole thing to sell papers. He paid it little mind. Riddle, the creature perched on the table with enormous round eyes, watched him while John tossed a dried fish across the room. A beetle landed silently on the windowsill. John stroked Riddle's head, then noticed the bug. He waved and closed the window. The beetle tried to squeeze through the crack. John picked up a bronze paperweight, transformed it into a bottle, trapped the beetle inside, and studied it. The insect carried magic. Animagus, he wondered. He uncorked the bottle just as the beetle flew out and flicked his wand. Revelio. The beetle changed midair into a woman in green, her curly blonde hair oddly permed, a long chin jutting from her face. Jeweled glasses hung crookedly from her nose. Her cheeks glowed with garish rouge. Rita Skeeter. John felt a cold hitch of apprehension. If he hadn't been wearing the mask, tomorrow's headline might well read, "Shock! Johnny Silverhand is actually a Hogwarts student." Animagi were hard to detect. If not for his insight and his truth-seeing eye, a sense more reliable than a sneakoscope, he might have been fooled. Rita froze when revealed. The eyes beneath her were filled with dread. John leveled his wand at her. "Give me a reason not to feed you to a dragon," he said quietly. "Esteemed Mr. Silverhand, this is a misunderstanding," Rita blurted, rubbing her hands as if she could bluff her way out. But she knew the truth. Being caught as an illegal animagus would ruin her. The powerful people she'd angered over the years could use the revelation to see her nailed to Azkaban. She begged. John considered her for a moment. She was perfect. If controlled, she could steer public opinion like few others. He opened a drawer of galleons, and Rita's eyes lit up. She thought he might bribe her. "Do something for me," he said. Rita understood that refusal would be worse than any prison. She agreed. Under John's direction, the Daily Prophet launched a new promotion, the Lucky Wizard Grand Prize, sponsored by the Silverhand Johnny store. Rita wrote glowing pieces, painting Mr. Silverhand as kind and approachable, the founder of a little wizard fund that supplied free aid to cursed children. The prize and the charity angle made influential wizards praise him, and sales soared. The prize was structured like a sweepstakes attached to each copy of the Daily Prophet. Sales shot up. There were 3 awards: the Galleon Award, the Sickle Award, and the Nut Award. On the day the promotion began, a wizard won the Sickle Award, 700 sickles, a tidy sum. The Lucky Wizard Grand Prize was off to a roaring start. An owl flew toward the burrow that morning carrying a newspaper. Arthur Weasley grabbed his copy and, on a whim, scratched the Lucky Wizard ticket attached to it. He scratched and peered at the result. Clang! The cup fell from his hand, milk splattering across his robes. Molly rushed out, ready to scold, but stopped when she saw Arthur's dazed, incredulous expression. "I won," he said, laughing in disbelief. "What?" Molly cried, bewildered. Ron, just waking, clutched Scabbers. The rat, alarmed by Arthur's laughter, wriggled free and darted back under the covers. George peered over and muttered, "Is Dad crazy? Fred, perhaps he drank too much elixir of euphoria." The Weasley twins exchanged a look, as if deciding whether this was one of their pranks. Percy had been buried in campaigning for student body president that year, and his course load was heavy, too. When all the children had gathered, Mr. Weasley burst in with exciting news. 700 galleons by Merlin's beard. Molly clapped a hand to her mouth. When had the Weasleys ever had so much money? She was so thrilled she wanted to throw her arms around Arthur, but the children were all watching. "I want to use this money to travel. What do you think about Egypt?" After winning the prize, Arthur was determined to take a trip. The Weasleys were not a family to hoard money, and everyone agreed immediately. Even Percy, who hadn't stopped studying over the holidays, was tempted. Arthur insisted he didn't want Percy to be overworked, and so travel seemed the sensible, worry-free choice. With the family's approval, plans for the trip began in earnest. Rita Skeeter, the journalist who had printed the story, could not fathom why the Weasleys had been singled out for such a fortune. One ticket, printed with the exact address. She didn't dare ask. Rita was being watched, and to avoid a stay in Azkaban, she had no choice but to obey the one holding the leash, Johnny Silverhand. With Arthur distracted by family holiday plans, his urge to bite the Malfoys was temporarily set aside. That gave the Malfoys a brief respite. Lucius took advantage of it and paid a personal visit to Mr. Silverhand. Seeing the eyes behind the silver mask made him uneasy. "Lucius Malfoy, I am very pleased you could come," John said calmly. John added, with a hint of meaning, "even if you are a Death Eater." Lucius's arrogance faltered. His pupils contracted. The old surety in his posture melted into something like terror. He felt exposed, as if he were a pawn placed by the ministry. He forced a strained smile and began to protest. "I was once controlled by you-know-who with the imperious curse, but that doesn't mean I am." "Lucius, you needn't be afraid." John stepped closer, his footsteps soft on the floor. Lucius stiffened. Sweat broke out on his brow. John reached for Lucius's left hand, even as the other man had his wand raised. Lucius glimpsed the eyes beneath the mask and froze. "I don't mind. On the contrary, I admire you." John's laugh, low and meaningful, left Lucius feeling as if every secret were suddenly transparent. John glanced at the wand tucked in Lucius's grip and chuckled. "Relax. I won't tell. Instead, I can give you every reason not to be a Death Eater, not because of the ministry, but because of your family." Lucius's fingers tightened around the wand, loosening, tightening again, 3 times. At last his courage collapsed into a rasping question. "What do you want?" "Friendship," John answered simply. The 2-syllable answer made Lucius feel unreal. Lord Voldemort had never offered him that word. John handed him today's Daily Prophet. "Arthur Weasley won't trouble you for a while. Consider this my sincerity." The headline clearly named Arthur Weasley as the prize winner. Lucius's chest unclenched a little. He stared at John. "You want me to be your friend? As a Malfoy, you should understand the value of alliances," John said. "They're the next most important thing after blood. We help each other. Today I helped you. Tomorrow you help me." He waved a hand over a candle. The flame guttered out. When he turned, the flame flared back to life. John extended his hand to Lucius and smiled. "Isn't that right?" Lucius hesitated, then took the slightly youthful hand, finding his voice deep and formal. "You are right, Mr. Silverhand. Malfoy is willing to be your friend." In pureblood society, ties between families, marriage and alliances, were everything. The old web of bloodlines had thinned. Among the 28 sacred families, some lines had died out, others were diminished. The new power in Nocturne Alley, extending friendship, was significant, and Lucius understood it was also a calculated move. He had little choice. The governorship of Hogwarts and his standing in the wizarding world were too valuable. Accepting John's overture was the safest way to protect himself from ministry scrutiny and the Aurors who would not hesitate to add another notch to their records. Lucius leaned forward, curiosity masking his unease. "How do you propose dealing with dark arts artifacts?" John's smile turned conspiratorial. "Do you know where you can lawfully possess dark arts objects besides the ministry?" Lucius frowned. John waved his hand, and a line of small green text shimmered into the air. "Beware of the Dark Arts Museum?" Confused, Lucius listened as John explained. If he set up a museum dedicated to the dangers of dark arts artifacts, he could legally collect them for study and display. Without a license, removing such items would be grave robbing. With official sanction, it was archaeology and education. John had applied to the ministry to establish precisely that, a museum of the dark arts, justified as necessary public education. Dangerous objects would have to be shown to teach the public their threat. That was the rationale John offered. It was a clever cover. The items on display would be under his control. Missing pieces could be written off as theft or destruction. The project looked like a civic good and would bring accolades to Cornelius Fudge's ministry. The ministry approved. Newspapers hailed Mr. Silverhand as a benevolent, civic-minded wizard. With that, the wizarding world's first such museum was officially in the planning stages under John's direction. Chapter 101, Level 4 Alchemy and Hermione's Invitation. In the back of the Silverhand Johnny store was John's private cauldron room. "Alchemy has finally leveled up," he murmured. With the successful refinement of the silent heart he had been working on, John reached Level 4 Alchemy. He put the obsidian-like necklace down on the table. It was one of the Silverhand Johnny of series. The Silent Heart's function was to block magical detection and keep internal sounds from leaking out. The last raid on Shafiq Manor had relied on everyone wearing one. The pendant, however, was an extremely simplified version of a magical remnant stone, a flawed item John had made based on notes in Nicholas Flamel's handbook. Its only job was to store and release magic. The true silent heart was the chain itself. Level 3 was too low to refine the Philosopher's Stone properly. Now I should be able to upgrade the design. John had Nicolas Flamel's knowledge recorded in his head. The processes were complex, and as he digested the theory, his alchemy improved. Flamel had donated his notes and then stepped away. He did not want a successor obsessed with legacy. As a teacher, Flamel had done well. John intended to be self-reliant. He would reforge a Philosopher's Stone himself. After some careful work, John held a pale purple, pigeon egg-sized stone. It was a nominal Philosopher's Stone, no elixir of life here, but it had some of the stone's transmutative power. "I'll call this a magic crystal," he decided. He pressed a spoon with his free hand under the crystal's influence. Under his gaze, the spoon slowly shifted to gold. In less than 10 seconds, the utensil was genuine gold. John cut a sliver from it. The metal was indistinguishable from real gold. The crystal darkened a touch in his palm. He estimated it had used up about 1/10 of its energy. If this had been the true Philosopher's Stone, that would have been negligible. There's still much to improve. He stowed the magic crystal and casually tossed the golden spoon into a drawer. He considered using his progress point to push alchemy further, but decided to be cautious. Rushing might lead to instability. Better to consolidate his current level first. After leaving the cauldron room, John delegated tasks to Tang Mi and slipped out of the shop under a disillusionment charm. The Wick family lingered in London for nearly a week. Watson Wick and Mr. Granger had taken up golf at first, but the two old men warmed to each other quickly. Their friendship grew absurdly fast. On the third day, while drinking by the river, Watson and Granger met a young woman they had seen earlier at a clinic. The men accepted her invitation for a drink after a few sips too many. They had barely settled on the bar stools when Mrs. Wick and Mrs. Granger arrived. The scene that followed was described by witnesses as terrifying. Watson's newly fitted ceramic teeth nearly shattered in the ensuing uproar. To shield his friend, Watson blustered and claimed the young woman had come for him. Mrs. Wick was outraged and prepared to administer proper family discipline. Mr. Granger, moved by Watson's loyalty, exchanged a long theatrical look with him. For a few ridiculous moments, it felt as if an old Chinese proverb echoed in the air. We may not have been born on the same day in the same year, but we wish to die on the same day in the same year. A sentimental song seemed to swell in the background. This vow, finding a kindred spirit in springtime, even the peach blossoms smile upon the altar. And so, amid scolding wives and scandalized bar patrons, Mr. Granger surrendered to the farce. He, too, self-destructed in the most honorable, ridiculous way possible. Section 88. He admitted the young woman's pursuit of him and that she had come back to the clinic repeatedly, which set Mrs. Granger off in a fury. The two women's combined onslaught kept John in London for 7 days. It wasn't that they hit especially hard. The real chaos came when two elderly men tried to flee and were struck by a toy car. The men tumbled down the stairs and ended up in the hospital for a few days in a tangled heap. Once they were discharged, the women calmed down. The men had no appetite left for mischief. Whatever had been hinted at was long gone. The young woman slipped away during the confusion, and the whole affair quietly died out. Back at his father's dormitory, the accommodation the company had assigned him, John pushed open the door and found his father leaning on a cane, struggling with the refrigerator for a bottle of beer. "Dad, if you're going to settle here, you didn't need to bring me along," John said, taking the beer his father had finally wrestled free. Watson protested loudly, resentful. After a little liquid courage, he'd become someone under supervision. John scooped up the beer and turned away while Watson wailed. "Behave, or I'll have Andre deal with you," John said, echoing Mrs. Wick's warning. Andre was one of John's uncles, someone Watson had seen break a poplar tree with his bare hands, a vicious sort. He was the one who had once suggested taking John hunting in the mountains. With no beer and nothing better to do, Watson sulked until a knock at the door. He assumed it was Granger. When he opened it, it was indeed a Granger, the younger one. Hermione stood there, unusually without a book and dressed in casual clothes. "Hello, Mr. Wick. I came for John." "John's over here." Watson said with pointed meaning, which made Hermione blink in mild confusion. John, hearing she was looking for him, came out. "John, want to go out?" It was the first time Hermione had invited a wizarding classmate out. John had nothing pressing to do and readily agreed. He expected Diagon Alley or some other wizarding haunt, but Hermione led him to a park. No magic, no wand work. The simplicity left him a little dazed. It felt like ages since he'd been somewhere so ordinary. He idly plucked a blade of grass and put it in his mouth, tasting the faint bitterness of green. "You seem familiar with this place," he said, watching Hermione. "This is where I used to come most," she said. "I wasn't very popular, you know." She tried to sound indifferent, but there was a small shadow of hurt. John nodded in understanding. Hermione had been brusque and know-it-all at first. Even Harry and Ron hadn't taken to her straight away. John was Hermione's first friend at Hogwarts, and she'd always felt a special protectiveness toward him. Not romantic, but caring. When Harry had accused John once, Hermione had leapt to his defense. She didn't want her friend labeled a murderer. John hadn't betrayed that trust. They reached a swing set. Hermione sat down, expecting John to push her, but he'd already claimed the swing across from her and was happily pumping higher and higher. Eventually, she asked what had been on her mind since they started talking. "John, why were you willing to be my friend?" He swung himself high and, hearing the question, said casually, "Friends, it's mostly about feeling, I guess." Hermione almost muttered about teeth and vanity to herself, but John's tone turned serious. He hopped off the swing and faced her. "Hermione, you have to accept who you are. You're brave and upright, and you're brilliant. Friends are about what's in your heart, not about proving yourself by risking everything." His earnestness eased something in her. "Thank you," she said, grateful. She looked up and found John already at the ice cream truck, a creamy cone in hand. He glanced back and asked what flavor she wanted. "Strawberry," she said. John paid for both cones, then frowned at the few pounds in his hand. He realized he'd been so absorbed in the magical world lately that he'd nearly forgotten how mundane things cost ordinary money. Later in July, John stopped by Privet Drive. He knocked on the Dursleys' door. Vernon Dursley saw him and scowled, but didn't dare say much. Dudley hurriedly hid. John handed Vernon a large watermelon he'd bought and asked, "Is Harry upstairs? Sorry to bother you." Vernon grunted a reply and pointed the way. Since John's last confrontation, the Dursleys had been less cruel to Harry. They still made snide remarks, but they no longer locked him away. Upstairs, Harry was bent over a history of magic essay. He looked up, surprised to see John, who produced an ice cream from his bag. "You came all this way just to bring me ice cream?" Harry asked, baffled. "Of course not," John said, pouting. He closed the door with a flick that made Harry's eyes widen. John could do magic without a wand in ways Harry couldn't yet. John pulled a pair of gloves out of his bag and put them on. Harry watched, puzzled. "What are you going to do?" "You said your scar hurt last time," John said. "I want to study it." Harry went still. He didn't know what others knew, but John certainly did. Harry's scar housed a piece of Voldemort's soul, an accidental Horcrux. John had read volumes about souls in the Slytherin and Gryffindor collections. The soul was complicated, and research into it had become taboo. But to John, such a mystery was irresistible. With protective anti-curse gloves on, he reached out and touched the scar. The scene was almost comical. Harry clutching his melting ice cream, John poring over the little lightning-shaped mark. John found, not a simple wound, but a powerful charm or curse embedded there. He frowned and muttered, wondering if it had to do with love. After all, the protection tied to Harry had once burned Quirrell alive. It was a miracle, woven with love, that even Voldemort seemed unable to break. "John, are you done?" Harry asked, anxious. "If I could, cut it open." John began, then stopped when he saw Harry's frightened look. "All right, I was joking, but if it hurts again, tell me immediately." Harry nodded fast, relieved at the reprieve. Back home, John set about forging a new weapon. He gathered equipment and melted down numerous silver sickles, blending them with mithril. In his basement, a sword of pure silver took shape. He knew wizarding currency bore goblin smithing techniques, and the metalwork here required careful control. He added other materials from the old Ironwick blade he'd disassembled. Snake venom had eaten into that sword, and John folded its properties into the new weapon. He engraved runes and used dragon's blood in the etching. When he underlay the blade with enchantments and applied intense heat, the silver did not melt. The blade held its form and absorbed the charms he bound to it. It was heavier from the added materials and carried corrosive qualities from the ironwick components. It was no Gryffindor sword, but it was a proper magical weapon. Section 89. Waving the wand, John left room on the blade for later enchantments. The weapon in his hand was an improved ironwick sword in every respect. "I'll call you Silverwick." He nodded with satisfaction and slipped the sword into his small satchel. The satchel itself was an alchemical masterpiece. Its undetectable extension charm was stable and the interior space vast. Night fell. John pulled on his silver mask and a green robe, then apparated to Nocturne Alley with a flick of his wand. Apparition had made coming and going much easier. Tangmi was already waiting, and beside him stood a stooped old man. With a crackle of magic, John appeared in front of them. The old man trembled, wanting to kneel. Tangmi explained, "My lord, this is old Jack from the werewolf community. He's come to ask for your help." Werewolf community? John's mind went back to Fenrir, whose arm and soul he had taken in their last encounter. Fenrir had been their leader. John's voice was low and steady. "State your request." Old Jack's voice was dry and hoarse. "Respected Mr. Silverhand, we ask for your protection. After Fenrir fell, the werewolves scattered. We who are old, weak, and sick were left exposed. After John had dealt with Fenrir, the stronger werewolves had fled. Those who remained had human blood on their hands, and if captured, would face Azkaban, guarded by Dementors. Old Jack and his handful of frail pack members had been at the bottom of the community's hierarchy. Without protection, dark wizards had begun moving to exterminate them. Desperate, they had come to the man who had set everything in motion. John looked at Tangmi for confirmation. Tangmi answered, "My lord, old Jack's group are all frail werewolves. They don't have the strength to kill wizards." John nodded and turned to the anxious old man. Calmly, he said, "I accept. In return, you must manage the werewolf community well." Werewolves, properly guided, could become a powerful force. Many of the younger werewolves had been bitten by Fenrir. With direction, they could be a future asset. Old Jack almost wept with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Silverhand. May Merlin bless you." A few days later, a dark wizard's body was thrown outside the werewolf community grounds. The mark of Silverhand rose over the settlement, and news of John's protection sent other dark wizards scattering. John also arranged a monthly supply of wolfsbane potion for the young werewolves to help them through full moons. His intervention made Silverhand Johnny's reputation grow. The Daily Prophet sent a reporter, Rita Skeeter, for an exclusive. "I hope there won't be any strange rhetoric," John said. Rita, visibly nervous, promised to write it properly. The paper ran a glowing piece titled "The Great Benefactor Silverhand Johnny," claiming his aim was world peace and relief from hunger for young wizards. Rita had even suggested to her editor nominating him as Great Benefactor of the Year, an idea that, the story noted, was turned down. Chapter 103, Level 4 Runes and Ancient Magic. An owl crashed into John's window, the Weasley family owl, unmistakable. He opened the window, lifted the bird, and took the letter from its beak. Ron wrote to say the whole family was going to Egypt and that their invitation to the burrow would have to wait. John smiled. He'd almost forgotten Ron had invited him in their second year. Back then, John had been distracted with experiments on scabbers and had assumed Ron wouldn't press it. Percy had also written, thanking John for helping secure his prefect badge and hinting at a future at the Ministry of Magic. Percy had moved through officialdom with singular focus, prefect, head boy, and then ambitions at the ministry. John chuckled. In that case, why wouldn't I help? He took a quill and wrote to Barty Crouch Sr. From what John knew, Crouch was someone worth cultivating. His ruthless justice, even when it meant acting against kin, had earned John's respect. Crouch might also be interested in a talented young man like Percy. After the routine letters, John picked up the Daily Prophet. The stir around Mr. Silverhand was cooling. The paper's coverage of a new museum warning against dark arts suggested Silverhand Johnny wasn't the greedy dark wizard some feared. The front-page photograph, however, was of Gilderoy Lockhart, celebrated by Witch Weekly for his smile, and the article gushed over his new book. "I wield a great sword at Hogwarts" became an instant sensation, topping sales for 3 weeks, it trumpeted. Lockhart's Hogwarts resume had become another glittering chapter in his legend. John had to admit, Lockhart was a talent for show. As long as his secrets stayed hidden, he was the wizarding world's premier celebrity. The book, part self-aggrandizing memoir, part hero tale, was clever in pairing a charismatic professor with a supposedly legendary student. Many events were exaggerated, but the narrative and pacing were masterful. John grinned. Perhaps I can keep packaging him. He decided to push Lockhart further. John wrote to Rita Skeeter. With the Daily Prophet's reach, Lockhart could keep selling. John's interest wasn't purely benevolent. He held the rights for the book under Silverhand Johnny's name and split the profits with Lockhart 60-40. Managing the book would bring steady income. He went down to the basement, which had become his private domain for dangerous and sensitive items. After a day of study and practice, John's runes had leveled up. He now had double level 4 in runes and reopened his copy of Goblin Forging. He could understand everything in it. Goblin Forging was unique. Goblin magic, ancient magic, dated back to before the four founders, from a time when goblins were not under wizard jurisdiction. Their techniques didn't rely on wands so much as innate craft. Ancient runes are part of ancient magic, John murmured. That was why runes mattered. He read carefully and then tried to apply goblin methods. The book described mobilizing elemental forces and injecting them into an object to build a natural magical circuit. John fitted a magic crystal to his hand, stretched both arms out, and focused his will. A small whirlwind coalesced in the enclosed basement. "Wind element," he said. He held his breath and guided the wind toward a ring of spells on the workbench. The moment the wind touched the ring activated. Petrificus totalis grazed John's cheek and the wind element collapsed. He smiled wryly. More tests needed. Goblin forging, tied to ancient magic, was difficult. Did he need a goblin craftsman like Godric Gryffindor had sought out? If so, those goblins worked out of Gringotts now, and ordinary goblins probably lacked the same legendary skill. John felt the familiar wariness. I'll have to do this myself. He checked his skill panel. 2 unspent points remained, and a new skill had appeared. Ancient Magic Mastery, gray and at level 1, locked because he hadn't yet accumulated enough knowledge. To level it up, he'd need more exposure to ancient magic. Ancient magic touched his biggest blind spot. He didn't even know its full nature. Learning it would be a long road. For now, John finished reading Goblin Forging. Even if it wasn't exhaustive, his background in alchemy and runes made much of it accessible. He planned his next steps. Search the restricted section for books on ancient magic, and failing that, study the chambers of secrets left behind by the founders. Those were the oldest sources he knew. Beyond that, he could trace things back to the tales of the 3 Deathly Hallows brothers. Over the next few days, John lived in the basement. He gradually mastered 3 additional elemental magics: mist, water, and fire, adding to the wind element he'd already practiced. Wind enhanced perception, mist obscured form, water summoned currents, and fire called flame. Best of all, he could now perform these 4 basic elements wandlessly, a significant gain. Section 90. Tom, do a backflip. That's amazing. How did you train this dog? Ah, nothing special. I just taught him casually. Guests had come to the Wick House, friends of Watson's from business. To smooth relations, one of them even brought a child about John's age. But when John saw the spoiled little brat, he felt like a babysitter and bolted outside to breathe fresh air. Ugh, I'm never doing this again, he muttered. Socializing with those kids felt worse than negotiating with a niffler over coins. Compared to that brat, at least Draco makes sense. Wandering aimlessly, John spotted a black dog by the roadside. It looked like it hadn't eaten in days. Even under its thick fur, it was painfully thin. Not exactly handsome, but John, being fond of animals and plushes, took out a bag of dried fish. You been hungry a long time? The dog stared off as if dazed, but when John offered the fish, it gobbled the pieces without hesitation. John felt a pang of sympathy and, patting the dog's head, said under his breath, I wonder where you came from. There aren't supposed to be strays around here. The dog's coat, despite the rough look, was surprisingly soft. John kept rubbing it, getting a little carried away and missing the startled look in the dog's eyes. The guests finally left. Tom panted, and a patch of fur was missing from his tail. The mischievous child had seen Tom do a backflip and pitched a fit, insisting the dog be given to him. His parents even offered to pay. Mrs. Wick flatly refused. Tom was her son's dog and a present she'd given him. The tantrum ended when Mrs. Wick smiled a little too sweetly while holding a carving knife. Watson, ever polite, couldn't stop it. When John came back in, Tom raced over in full energy until he suddenly froze, sniffed John as if in disbelief, and barked, clearly saying, "You brought another dog." John sighed. "I only petted one, that's all." He scooped up the indignant Tom and tried a guilty smile. "We were just playing, Tom. I'm not keeping any other dogs, I promise." "Woof woof." Tom wagged his tail so fast his skepticism melted away. John calmed him with food and then noticed a snowy owl land on a cabinet and hoot twice, hungry. "Where were you hiding?" John asked, taking dried fish and handing it to the owl. As he carried it down, he spotted another snowy owl in his attic room. "You're Basil. Then who are you?" Basil stiffened when he saw John holding the other owl. Hedwig flapped up and flew to the window as if to look toward the Dursleys' house. The second-floor window there was open, so she must have slipped out. Is that big black dog still out there?" John glanced toward the road. The stray dog was still squatting where he'd left it. Basil eyed Hedwig suspiciously, and, before Hedwig could react, Basil smacked her with a wing. The two owls began a frantic squabble. John separated them, and since that hadn't worked, offered dried fish to both until they finally quieted. A little while later, he heard someone calling for Hedwig below. "Harry, over here!" Harry looked up and saw Basil beside John. "John, have you seen Hedwig?" he asked. Another snowy owl had just appeared at the window. "Hedwig!" Harry cried, rushing to the Wick house. Wick opened the door, looking every bit the dignified socialite she was, and Harry grew nervous. "Oh, come in, Harry. By the way, could you secretly turn my teacup into a mouse?" she asked. Watson Wick, spotting Harry, grew openly enthusiastic and, pulling the boy aside, whispered, "I won't tell a soul. I'll keep it as a pet." Harry was bewildered. Mr. Wick seemed to expect too much of him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wick. I don't know any advanced transfiguration like that, and we're not allowed to cast spells outside school." Watson blinked. Not allowed? He thought his son's constant tinkering at home already counted as casting spells. Harry, flustered, had to retreat upstairs. The Wick attic was far roomier than the Dursleys'. John lived there alone amid dog beds and bird cages. It was practically a menagerie, yet he still had a sort of young noble air about him. Hedwig tucked into dried fish while Harry kept thanking him. John noticed the black dog was gone, probably wandered off. "It's good you came. I was about to give you your birthday present," John said, and handed Harry a wrapped box. Harry hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a small bottle filled with black powder that glittered like starlight when shaken. He had never seen anything like it. "What is it?" he asked. "It warns you if someone's prying," John explained, taking out a pinch and flicking it. The powder danced in the air and clung to the doorframe like stardust. "Sprinkle it around and it'll give a warning." Just then, Watson called from downstairs, embarrassed. "Drinks are ready." He opened the door, set them out, and hurried away. John capped the bottle casually. "See? Handy." Harry's eyes lit up. No more fear of Uncle Vernon eavesdropping. The item didn't have a name yet, so John shrugged. "Let's call it Stardust." After Harry left with Hedwig, August came, and John headed to Diagon Alley. Johnny Silverhand, the name John sometimes used, wrapped in mystery, kept a low profile. He stopped in a divination shop and bought a crystal ball. The orb seemed filled with white mist, but after several tries, he couldn't force a prophecy. "Of course," he said, "this isn't something you learn overnight." He abandoned divination for now and tossed the crystal ball on his desk like a marble in Johnny Silverhand's office. He flicked it with his finger and a knock came at the door. John straightened and called, "Come in, friend." The door opened to reveal pale gold hair that looked almost oily in the light. Lucius Malfoy stood there with his son, Draco. Draco's face was taut with nerves. Meeting the mysterious Mr. Silverhand was clearly intimidating. Lucius bowed with a smile. "Mr. Silverhand, it's been some time." John had recently neutralized the threat that the Ministry might raid the Malfoy home, and word had spread. Some influential wizards were whispering against Dumbledore for expelling a Malfoy, and many of them credited Johnny Silverhand behind the scenes. Lucius came now with a face full of gratitude and the desire to get closer. "This is my son, Draco," Lucius said, patting the boy's shoulder. Draco stepped forward, voice trembling with forced formality. "It's an honor to meet you, esteemed Mr. Silverhand." John looked at them and wondered silently, what exactly is Lucius up to? Section 91. Lucius smiled as he stated his purpose. "I hope my son might have the honor of becoming Mr. Silverhand, Johnny's godson." John's mask would have dropped if it were possible. His surprise would have been obvious. Draco's godfather? Me? His head spun. They were classmates. If he accepted, how would they address one another later? Draco to him by name, and Draco calling him godfather. John also understood Lucius's motive. This was about more than friendship. Lucius wanted to bind their families together. A friendship could be broken. A godson and godfather felt intimate, almost familial. "I understand what you're trying to do, Lucius," John said in a low voice, "but this would be inappropriate." Lucius looked taken aback. He hadn't expected a refusal. Draco's face fell. His father had told him this was important for the Malfoy family's future. "Mr. Silverhand, Johnny, Draco is a good boy." "I know, Lucius. I know better than you do," John interrupted, quietly amused. After all, he and Draco had been classmates for 2 years. Lucius glanced at Draco, puzzled that Johnny knew the boy so well. Draco himself looked bewildered. John softened his tone. "I see a real desire to improve in this child, Lucius. He's being wasted. It's a rare quality, like a pearl in the dust." "Self-improvement?" Lucius scrutinized his son, trying to find that trait. He couldn't see it. John went on, voice deep and hoarse, almost like an old bard. "He will become a strong wizard, relying on himself rather than his parents. His achievements will make you proud." Praise costs little, so John leaned into it. He already has someone he wants to follow. That person will change everything. He is like a star in the sky, lighting up the wizarding world. Draco's heart stirred at those words. John seemed to see through everything. He looked straight at Draco and asked with meaning, "Child, do you choose to follow that person, or do you want to live your life under someone else's protection?" Draco hesitated, then set his jaw. "I'm sorry, Mr. Silverhand, Johnny, but I already have someone to follow. He isn't as powerful as you, but he's worth following." "Draco?" Lucius's eyes widened. Draco was acting strangely. John raised a hand to forestall Lucius and rose to his feet, walking over to Draco. He smiled with a hint of mystery. "I look forward to it." The pressure made Draco draw a deep breath. He nodded earnestly. "That day will come." John nodded in satisfaction. He didn't need to take Draco as a godson after all. To prevent Lucius from pushing further, he produced several letters. "These are the letters pureblood families send to Hogwarts, returned to the Board of Governors before Christmas this year." Lucius brightened. A seat on the board would restore the ancient dignity of House Malfoy. But John added a condition. His dark eyes met Lucius's. "You must not be too involved in the running of Hogwarts. This seat on the board will be a title, nothing more." Lucius's expression fell. This was not what he'd hoped for. John continued, cold and steady. "Be content where you are. The man you angered is hailed as the most powerful headmaster in Hogwarts history. You should know even you-know-who would not want to be his enemy," John said. Those words struck Lucius to the core. Whatever he thought, this man could see through it. Dumbledore's years of low profile had made people forget that he had once faced 2 generations of Dark Lords. There may be 2 Dark Lords, but there is only one master of white magic. Lucius swallowed his displeasure. He understood the Malfoy family must lie low for now. They left together. John watched them go, the familiar mysterious expression settling back on him. Thinking it over, he murmured, "Judging by Lucius's attitude, he doesn't know the current state of Lord Voldemort." As a former Death Eater, Lucius would not have dared to call his old comrades if Voldemort had been strong. That suggested Voldemort was weak. Good news. John couldn't remember the precise events of the 3rd year. If Voldemort had been stirring, he would not have expected this. He dismissed the thought with a shrug. Never mind. Harry will block the soldiers, and old Dumbledore will cover the waters. He cast a disillusionment charm over himself, slipped out of the Silverhand Johnny store, and apparated from a quiet side street. His apparition was getting smoother. Frequent trips to Nocturne Alley had sharpened his skill, and he expected to reach level 3 soon. Back home, he searched for Tom and couldn't find her. Basil, where did Tom go? Basil lay in his usual spot, half asleep. Hearing John's voice, he looked toward the window. John walked over and saw, to his surprise, his own short-legged dog curled up beside the large black stray he'd met once before. "You were jealous last time, and now you're best friends," John mused. Watching them, he couldn't help but notice how badly Basil was outclassed by the long-legged stranger. The two had become fast companions. John wondered if the big dog was male. He remembered Tom was female. Had she grown up and found a mate? "Alas, Tom, you don't stand a chance, by which I mean your legs." The size difference made John doubt the match would ever succeed. He imagined a tragic love story, a handsome, long-legged stray and a pampered, sheltered house dog. It was nothing to worry about. He'd be at school soon, and the miles would break any habit. Outside on Privet Drive, the big black dog had his own memories. Sirius Black had been hiding there, evading the Ministry and the Dementors. The day he read the newspaper, he had been certain the rat was alive. The man who had betrayed them had spent 12 years in fear, hiding as a rat with a Muggle family. Sirius was furious and contemptuous. He had never expected betrayal from a friend who'd once been made an animagus alongside him and the other marauders. He wanted to tear that rat apart. The dog's expression was deep and complicated. Tom couldn't understand it. She wagged and twirled. Seeing her, Sirius remembered the dried fish he'd once tasted. After 12 years in Azkaban and a desperate swim across the sea to reach Harry, his meals had been garbage and insects. Dried fish felt like a feast. Saliva dripped from his mouth. Tom noticed, and understanding he was hungry, darted back on her short legs. A moment later, she dragged out a large bag of dog food. It wasn't dried fish, but Sirius's eyes lit with gratitude. She pushed the bag over and scattered the food. He lowered his head and found meat patties among the kibbles. He ate until he was nearly moved to tears. Watching his dogs eat, John pictured his pampered pet as a daughter, keeping a gigolo and lavishing money on him. "Good heavens, I didn't expect you to be such a dog," he muttered, looking at the big black dog and wondering if he should have him neutered to prevent harm to other pets. "Is he the Daniel Wu of dogs?" he joked to himself. After a few more idle thoughts, John gave up worrying. He now had a new daily duty, watching Tom bring food and treats down from the attic and feed the stray. Her generosity made him worry she was a lost cause. Stepping on a book that tried to nip at him, John bent to pick up the Monster Book of Monsters. His fingers brushed the spine, and the book relaxed with a soft, almost purring sound. "Hagrid chose this as the textbook? Are you sure there won't be any biting incidents?" he asked aloud. Hagrid had asked John to preview the textbook. What surprised John most was that Dumbledore had appointed Hagrid Professor of Care of Magical Creatures. Since they'd learned Voldemort was the architect behind those events 50 years ago, Hagrid had been cleared of false accusations and could finally lead a normal life again. Justice may be late, but it's not absent. Yet is delayed justice still justice? John wondered. 50 years is a long time for most people. Few are Nicholas Flamel. Hagrid had been wronged, and the years had taken their toll. If Dumbledore hadn't protected him, he might have been drained by Dementors long ago. Still, Hagrid's passion for magical creatures had never faltered, and Dumbledore likely considered the professorship a way to make amends. Hagrid, who had never been a professor before, had immediately thought of John as an assistant for defense against the dark arts. Looking at the curriculum Hagrid sent him, John could only shake his head. Blast-ended Scroots are fine, but couldn't there be some more pleasant creatures? In Hagrid's eyes, every magical beast was lovable. For the students, that wasn't always true. John set to work revising Hagrid's list of animals, choosing a better balance. When he'd finished, he sat back, tired, and noticed something huge floating in the sky, a vast balloon drifting above the rooftops. Chapter 106, A Balloon in the Sky and Dursley's Fear. A good-for-nothing, a lazy slob, a liar, a worthless wretch. He is not. Harry trembled with anger at Aunt Marge's words. He would not let anyone insult his father like that. Uncle Vernon, sensing the danger, filled Aunt Marge's glass with the rest of the brandy and slid it to her. He barked at Harry. "You go to bed now. Go." No, Vernon. Marge drained the brandy, belched loudly, and fixed her bloodshot eyes on Harry. She poked at the faint lightning bolt on his forehead as she sneered, "Go on then, boy. You're so proud of your parents, aren't you? They died in a car crash." Harry couldn't stand it any longer. He stood up, voice raw with fury. "They didn't die in a car crash." Vernon's face drained of color. His stubby fingers twitched. He wanted to tell Marge to stop, but she seemed possessed. Cruel words poured out of her without restraint. She called Harry a burden, an ungrateful little beast. As she continued, something impossible began to happen. Her body started to inflate. Harry watched, horrified, as she swelled up like a balloon and began to float toward the ceiling. Vernon screamed and lunged, trying to grab her, but he nearly lifted off the floor with her. The house erupted into chaos. Harry didn't want to be there another second. He snatched his trunk and shoved his way to the door. Vernon moved to stop him, but Harry's anger had snapped. He drew his wand with a single, furious motion and shoved it in Vernon's direction. "This is your doing. Get out of my way!" Faced with that look, Vernon dared not intervene. Harry dragged his trunk down the street and, after a few blocks, the adrenaline faded. He dropped, panting, onto a low wall on Magnolia Crescent, heart racing and exhausted. Confusion and dread washed over him. Where could he go? He'd used magic in front of muggles, underage magic, and if the Ministry found out, he could be in serious trouble. Azkaban flashed across his mind as a nightmare possibility. He sat there for a long 10 minutes, stomach knotted, emotions tumbling like a spilled spice jar, sour, bitter, sickly sweet, sharp. Maybe I'll be wanted, he thought bleakly. I'll wander the muggle world alone. He thought of Ron and Hermione. No matter what, they would help him. Hedwig had been sent to stay with Ron because of Marge's visit, so he couldn't contact anyone immediately. He felt utterly hopeless. "Harry, it seems lively over there tonight." A voice cut through the fog of his thoughts. John stepped out of the shadows, oddly holding a tin of dried fish. Harry recognized him and realized John must live nearby. He'd seen what had happened. John raised an eyebrow at the despondent boy. "Planning to run away from home?" "John, I might have to leave. I might be wanted." Harry's voice was small. "Do you have any money? I need to get away further." "Don't be ridiculous," John said, but there was no judgment in it, only a steady calm. "You're the boy who lived. Do you think the Ministry will throw you in Azkaban over this? No, but you do need to calm down." John suggested a place to wait. "If you don't want to go back, stay at the Leaky Cauldron for a while. I'll make sure you're looked after." Harry, still shaken, let out a weary breath. "All right, maybe you're right." John put a reassuring hand on his shoulder and from a small satchel produced a pouch that clinked with coins. Harry's eyes widened as John offered it. "You wanted to borrow money, did you not?" "This is too much," Harry muttered, embarrassed, counting through the coins. More than 100 galleons. John pouted with mock reproach. "You've got a vault full of gold and you act poor in front of me?" He tossed the pouch toward Harry. The coins hit against Harry's palms with a heavy, comforting clatter. John turned and headed back toward the Dursleys' house. With such a spectacle in the sky, a woman ballooning away, he had to fix things before any muggles noticed. Harry sat for a moment, clutching the coins, a warmth settling in his chest at John's quiet kindness. Then a chill crawled down his neck. He frowned and peered into the darkness at the other side of the street. Something was there. Lumos. The tip of his wand flared. A pair of gleaming eyes met his. Across the road, a massive black dog, bear-like and lumbering, watched him. Harry startled, stumbled backward, and went down. A sudden, piercing sound cut through the night. Beep, beep. A blinding light flashed. Harry squinted through his fingers and saw a purple triple-decker bus draw up to the curb. A wiry, young-looking conductor with large, jutting ears hopped down and peered at him. "What are you doing sitting on the pavement?" the conductor asked, bewildered. Harry blinked. The big black dog was gone. Screams, barking, and pandemonium drifted from the Dursleys' house like a storm. Marge still floated outside, but as the wind began to carry her, a snowy owl dived and caught the collar of her coat, hauling her back toward the house. John was already at the Dursleys' front door, knocking. Inside, the sounds were so chaotic it was a wonder anyone could hear. John's hand brushed the doorknob, and it clicked open as if of its own accord. He stepped in. The commotion faltered, as if someone had pressed pause. "You dare come here!" You, Vernon Dursley bellowed. John simply frowned. With one cool look, he silenced Vernon, who swallowed the rest of his words. Outside, Basil, John's snowy owl, had already dragged Marge down. The Dursleys scrambled forward. Get her back to normal, quickly, Vernon barked, panic making his voice thin. John's expression stayed unreadable. If you'd had a better grounding in Muggle manners, you'd know how to speak to guests, he said flatly. Vernon's face went a purple red with barely suppressed fury. He forced out, please help her. Make her normal. That's better, John said, and with a flick the bloated impression in Marge's coat collapsed. She slumped onto the floor, hair askew and wide-eyed, still dazed. Her great inflatable bulk folded away as though a hole had been punched in it. Her dog patted over but could not rouse her. A sharp knock and a second, colder authority sounded at the door. 2 ministry officials arrived then, alerted by reports, officials who had come, as was their duty, to deal with a Muggle witnessing magic. They took in the scene, Marge on the floor, the Dursleys in a state, and John sitting calm as ever on the sofa, Basil perched on his shoulder. You're here. There's a Muggle who needs her memories of this incident wiped, Vernon stammered. John turned, smiling as if the whole thing were a small inconvenience. You don't need to thank me for saving you the bother of a search, he said conversationally, nodding to Basil. If you have 2 dried fish for my owl, he'll be grateful. The ministry men exchanged baffled looks. That remark turned their suspicion into a puzzled shrug. This boy was not Harry Potter. The report simply said magic had been used. John's presence didn't prove anything. In the end, the officials performed their duty. They modified Aunt Marge's memory. The spell left the Dursleys trembling and grateful and convinced that the ministry had, in effect, made Marge forgetful. After they left, everything settled back toward normality. John did not leave with them. He sat down, Basil settling comfortably against his shoulder. Now, Mr. Dursley, he said softly, turning his attention to Vernon, can you tell me why Harry was so angry? Vernon's throat worked. This young man, the same age as Harry, carried an authority that made Vernon swallow his defensive words. He tried to explain. It was Marge. She said things about Harry's parents. Accidentally? John asked mildly. Not exactly, Vernon corrected, voice tight. There were some unpleasant remarks. John gave a long, almost pitying sigh. No wonder Harry had exploded. In Harry's memory, his parents were perfect. Marge had attacked that image, and in the heat of it, Harry had reacted with uncontrolled magic. It hadn't even been wand work, which told John something else important. Strong emotion had leaked out as magic. John tapped the armrest, watching Vernon's frightened face as if straightening the room with an invisible hand. You seem to have a misunderstanding about wizards, he said finally. Vernon bristled at the accusation, but John's look brooked no argument. He leaned back on the sofa. You think wizards are like stage magicians, tricks and sleight of hand? No, Vernon started. A wizard can demolish a house with a flick or make a car veer off a cliff, John continued, his voice flat and factual. Vernon inhaled sharply. Students can't cast spells outside of school, can they? Yes and no, John said. He gave a short, humorless chuckle. It's not as if wizarding education erases a person's nature the day they leave Hogwarts. Wizards remain wizards. He fixed Vernon with a steady gaze. Mr. Dursley, I'm not trying to scare you, but you are pushing Harry. You keep provoking him, driving him toward a breaking point. That kind of pressure pushes a child toward something terrible. Section 93, Vernon's head was buzzing. He had always detested Harry, but he had never imagined how serious things could get. Today, if Harry had been even a little more irrational, you might not have waited for my arrival, John said. Life is fragile. Why provoke a wizard with such a bad attitude? You could have been a very good family. Hearing the word family, Petunia Dursley clutched Vernon's hand. Harry was her sister's child. When Lord Voldemort killed Harry's parents, Petunia had lost her sister as well. She had long resented Lily's magical talent, but she had never intended to abandon her nephew. Conflicting emotions had always made her treatment of Harry unpredictable, and John's words laid those contradictions bare. Vernon broke out in a cold sweat. When Harry had pointed his wand earlier, Vernon had felt his heart stop. My words are finished, Mr. Dursley. I apologize for the disturbance. Seeing that the Dursleys finally understood they needed to change, John left. On his way back, he bumped into the big black dog again, the same animal that had eaten the dried fish earlier. John took the last of the dried fish from his pocket and set them on the ground. The dog stared for a moment, then walked over and gobbled them up. John patted the animal's head and went on his way. Sirius, watching from a distance, had seen it all very clearly. This man was one of Harry's friends. Sirius chewed on the remaining dried fish, thinking about how to catch that traitor. Less than a month of summer vacation remained. Back at home, John nudged the crystal ball. It rolled off the desk and onto the floor. Tom, his dog, bounded over and tried to pick it up with his mouth. "Looks like the little wizard's enthusiasm isn't low," John said. A large pile of letters sat on the desk, all addressed to Mr. Johnny Silverhand. The Little Wizard Fund had paid for wolfsbane potions for cursed young wizards before they came of age, but a large portion of the fund remained unallocated. Thanks to Lockhart's book royalties and the steady income from Johnny Silverhand's shop, the fund had grown quite substantial. John didn't want the money to sit idle. He decided to use it to boost Johnny Silverhand's reputation and to give young wizards a chance to pursue their dreams. Silverhand Angel Investment would fund promising startups. If you had a good enough idea, the fund would back you. The initiative had helped many young inventors get started, and letters kept pouring in from all over the country. John even set up a special mailbox for them. Every time Riddle, his carrier owl, arrived, it carried a heavy bag of mail. John picked up one envelope and blinked. "Fred and George?" Of course, the Weasley twins. John knew their imagination and knack for invention. He opened the letter with interest. Inside, beneath the usual jests, was a rare seriousness. They really needed funding for a joke shop. "A joke shop? That's a very good idea," he mused. He dipped a quill and wrote back to the twins. He would fund them, but he needed to verify their goods first. Then he frowned and remembered they were traveling in Egypt. "Never mind. I'll send the reply when they get back," he said, sealing the letter. He moved on through the pile. Hermione had sent a photograph from Paris. In it, she looked a little darker skinned, perhaps just an effect of the light. One letter caught his attention. Damo Alex, the researcher he'd sent notes to, had finally replied. Alex sounded very interested in the research John had sent him. He'd been working in the lab non-stop and now had results he wanted John to see. John apparated to Belby Manor. A respectful house elf greeted him and led him inside. Damo Alex appeared looking exhausted, his ears steaming as if from a fever, heavy dark circles under his eyes, but his excitement was undiminished. "You shouldn't be drinking so many stimulants," John said. Damo waved him off and dragged him to the workbench. He produced a bottle of blood-red potion. "Without a specific blood curse test subject, I could only prepare it along the lines of the wolfsbane potion," he said. "But I think this will break the blood curse." John's expression didn't change. He knew the blood curse, an inherited, malignant enchantment that had tormented families for generations. It was notorious and supposedly unbreakable. He reached out and took the bottle. The scarlet liquid gave off an unpleasant odor. "I'm more concerned about its hereditary nature," he said. "Magic usually dies with the caster. The blood curse doesn't fit that pattern." Damo's enthusiasm finally ebbed. He yawned, tried to keep talking for a few minutes, and then collapsed right there on the floor and fell into a deep sleep. John looked at him. The man would sleep for a while. As John considered where to wait, something strange happened. Light filled his eyes, and the room around him dissolved into a primeval forest. A faint murmur threaded through the air, almost indecipherable. "What's this?" John murmured. He felt his body go tense. The murmur in his ears resolved into words. "I'm here." A figure flashed before his vision. It felt like being pulled along a rope, like slipping into the channel of apparition. He lurched back and forth, approaching some exit, and then, just before he left, lines of shimmering silver light floated before him. He reached for them, grasped them with all his strength, and his entire body plunged. The visions vanished. He was standing again in Belby Manor, gasping. He stared at his right hand. One end of that silver strand seemed to trail off into nothing. He bent over the table and found, to his surprise, a book at hand. On a page was a neat, careful entry about the blood curse. At the same time, a notice rose in his mind. His mastery of ancient magic had increased. The voice he had heard felt familiar somehow, not quite goblin, but with a similar cadence. Ancient magic, he thought. He ran his finger over the page describing the blood curse. The voice had been mournful, almost female. John held the memory for a moment. At worst, I'll go take a look, he said aloud. The silver line in his palm tightened, as if tugging. He felt something pulling him toward a place far beyond this country. Chapter 108, Albania and the Source of the Call. After the silver strand slipped from his palm, it began to retract in a single direction. John gripped it again. The thread stilled and a faint force pulled on it. It's guiding me, he realized. He paused, then left Belby Manor. Instead of apparating in the usual way, he did something risky. He let the line pull him. At the moment of departure, the tugging strengthened. The sensation was unlike any apparition he'd ever used. His body felt squeezed and stretched as though traveling through a narrowing tunnel. Pain and vertigo washed over him. Then, with a sharp, thunderous bang, he landed, bathed in silver light. The strand in his hand dissipated. He looked around. The landscape was wild and ancient, primeval forests stretching in every direction. He checked the sky, then muttered under his breath, I can confirm I have illegally entered a country. Nausea rolled through him. Long-distance apparition had always been dangerous, and this was his first time letting a mysterious force transport him. He dry-heaved a few times, then steadied himself. The scene matched the vision he'd just had. A massive trident-shaped tree rose nearby, the very tree he had glimpsed before. Something had been hiding on it then, and had left. John approached the tree carefully. When he focused his gaze, his pupils darkened. Faint, chaotic-colored elemental fluctuations clung to the bark. Not many, only a few. Ancient magic, he thought. He reached out and touched one of the particles. Instantly, it shifted and formed into a serpent that bit his palm. He yanked his hand back. A dark welt bloomed there, small but ugly. Very aggressive, he commented. He experimented a moment longer. From the tip of his finger, a ball of water rose and enveloped the chaotic particle. The color stabilized inside the droplet, and two more droplets formed, each encasing a particle. The 3 water beads orbited his hand. Only goblin magic, a form of ancient magic, could exert that kind of control, he thought. He felt the connection deepen, a faint, old calling tugging at the edges of his mind, and knew he had just stepped into the source of something much older than the houses and lawns he came from. Section 94. John grabbed one of the droplets and whispered, "Point me." He was only testing it, but the bead of water in his palm spun and pointed in a direction. He followed it. The bushes around him grew thicker, and stranger creatures slipped away into the trees. If Hagrid were here, he'd be thrilled, John muttered. A red cap lunged at his knee. He kicked it away and kept walking. After a while, the water droplet in his hand burst. He picked up another and repeated the trick. After the last bead dissolved, he had been walking for nearly an hour. At last he saw an exit, a small wooden cabin. It was dark inside. John hesitated a moment, then cast a disillusionment charm on himself and crept closer. From within came a sound like a python hissing and the wet flick of a tongue, followed by a chilling, sucking voice. Nagini. The name made his skin prickle. The last time he'd heard a voice like that had been in the Chamber of Secrets during his first year. It was hoarse and cold, like winter stone pressed against a throat. He tightened his grip on his wand and peered through the cabin window. Where the cabin's owner had once been, now lay a pale, deformed figure, slumped atop a 12-foot-long snake. Lord Voldemort. Weak and emaciated, sustained apparently by venom, he looked like a living corpse. An idea exploded into John's head. Kill him. Once the thought arrived, it swelled into an obsession. He had already defeated Quirrell, who had been possessed by Voldemort, and he had beaten Tom Riddle, the student. Maybe he could finish this. Maybe he could change the whole timeline, prevent the battles that would scar Hogwarts in years to come. The images rushed through his mind. Merlin Award, future White Magic King, Mr. Silverhand hailed as a savior of the wizarding world. John's heart hammered. He raised his wand, ready for Avada Kedavra or Fiend Fire. As he prepared to strike, his vision blurred and a foreign compulsion arced through him. Then he snapped back. Fiend Fire, he barked. Crimson flames erupted and swallowed the cabin. Voldemort roared. The snake lashed to escape, but was encircled by Fiend Fire. The flames twisted into a dragon and slammed through the cabin window. The moment the fire crossed the threshold, it hit a barrier, shivered, and reformed into a green, fiery serpent that lunged back toward John. Sweat slicked his brow. The world narrowed. He saw, with a clarity that drained his limbs, that the flames had been reflected. If he'd followed through, he would have been killed by his own spell. All the urges and fantasies vanished. There's a highly advanced reflection charm on this, he thought, the dread in his chest settling. He realized he'd almost fallen into a trap. There had been a foreign influence, like the effect of the diary when Harry had been controlled. He retreated silently, grateful for his foresight enchantment, otherwise he might have perished. From a safe distance, he watched the cabin. Blackened particles swirled out from around it, chaotic motes flowing not from Voldemort, but from the snake. Could Nagini be more than an animal? John didn't remember Voldemort knowing ancient magic, but the Dark Lord had been ambitious enough to learn many forbidden things. The particles seemed to originate from within the snake. Nagini, Neville later cut her down as a Horcrux, he murmured. Staring at the great serpent, he heard a voice in his ear. I'm here. Save me. It was mournful, hollow with pain. The sound seemed to come from the snake itself, as if someone were trapped inside it. Maybe this was Voldemort's magic, or something worse. He remembered the book about the blood curse he'd touched in the library. The blood curse could warp a person into a snake, granting animagus-like power but twisting the soul. If that were the case, then Nagini might once have been human, the kind of ancient magic that explained the chaotic particles. John's mind worked through the possibilities. If the snake was a Horcrux and effectively part of Voldemort, taking it would be dangerously difficult. Going back for help was impractical. He had no idea where he was and would probably get lost. He was alone with the Dark Lord nearby. Still, he couldn't just leave an ancient magical specimen unexamined. He decided to wait. Based on the sounds and the way the snake appeared to be summoned to forage, he guessed Nagini would leave the cabin eventually. He set a limit for himself. If the snake didn't leave within a week, he would walk away. He settled in to wait, thankful he'd brought a small satchel stocked with dried fish and other rations he had meant for owls. Chapter 109. Capturing the large snake in conversation. Time is a strange thing. Sometimes it slips away, sometimes it crawls. 3 days in, John was getting restless. An irritating compulsion kept gnawing at him, urging him to storm the cabin and unleash fiendfire or a shattering curse. The urge felt invasive, like something had lodged itself in his mind and demanded action. He distracted himself by studying runes and, when necessary, casting disillusionment charms to soothe his nerves. On the 6th day, Nagini finally slithered out. John watched her leave the cabin. He needed the snake to be within 10 paces to make the capture possible, but he also had to stay far enough from the cabin to avoid setting off the reflection charm. He tapped his wand on a tree and cast a super sense spell to cover 100 meters. No rustle or movement would escape his notice. Then he summoned a light, misty fog with a puff of breath, mist magic, and wrapped himself in it, hovering above the snake with flight. Even in the haze, Nagini followed a well-worn path. She struck and swallowed a lost rabbit whole, fur and all, and even took small, furious red caps without hesitation. She hissed sometimes, but John didn't possess Parseltongue. Wherever she passed, faint, chaotic particles lingered, mostly within her body and dissipating quickly. He trailed her to a 3-pronged tree, the place where he'd first arrived. She fed as she went, savage and efficient, nothing like the sorrowful voice he'd heard. This spot would do. Even if Voldemort noticed, he wouldn't reach them in time. John donned anti-curse gloves from his satchel and produced a small bottle of black powder, the residue of a unicorn's horn Quirrell had once used. Quirrell had wanted him to join the Death Eaters and had the horn ground into a powder that, when used properly, could sedate or incapacitate. John tipped out a little onto his palm and used a gust of wind magic to carry the powder over the snake's head. The dust was nearly invisible. Without his super sense, he might never have noticed where it settled. As the powder settled on Nagini's scales, the monstrous figure inside the cabin snapped open his eyes. "Someone has found Nagini," Voldemort hissed. "No!" John shouted. Lord Voldemort watched Nagini sleep and, without hesitation, poured the rest of his power into a single curse. John glanced towards the wooden hut. The evil spell shot out like a laser, making his scalp tingle. He descended as fast as he could and arrived beside the sleeping great snake. Grabbing its tail, John apparated away without a second thought. Two figures compressed into a flash and vanished before the curse hit. The earth where they had stood split open. Voldemort's blow alone had reshaped the topography there. Even so, Voldemort could not keep them. He roared from inside the hut. The animals nearby fell silent, their lives snuffed out by that sound. Outside Belby Manor there was a loud crack, and the great snake was thrown out. John's face was pale. His apparition was only level 2, and carrying such a long creature over that distance had nearly finished him. He'd also heard Voldemort scream as he left. The sound had struck something raw in him, like an impact to the skull. As he steadied himself, he thought, with skill like that, even without a wand, the second Dark Lord is terrifying. His mind went to Tom Riddle, only a 5th year at the time, already showing Auror-level strength. It was hard to imagine how much more powerful Voldemort had been at his peak. If Dumbledore hadn't stood in his way, perhaps he would have ruled the wizarding world long ago. Even John, who had faced the Dark Lord several times, felt his heart race after narrowly escaping. He dragged the great snake toward Belby Manor. Damo Alex, who'd slept a little while earlier, woke to find John gone. They had agreed to share their work. Alex couldn't believe John had taken the results and run. The idea of losing credit for the discovery panicked him more than the thought of death. He hurriedly began composing a letter to publish his findings first. Just as he was polishing the proclamation, John returned. "Demo Alex, do you have a dungeon or somewhere with barrier magic?" John's appearance was disheveled, grass and leaves stuck in his hair, dew on his clothes though it hadn't rained, and he was dragging a 12-foot snake, its life uncertain, behind him. "What is that?" Demo Alex forgot his letter entirely. He wanted to drag John outside and demand answers, but John didn't give him the chance and led him straight to the Belby family dungeon. They shoved the great snake into the cell, and John cast a barrier charm. Damo Alex watched, stunned. "Phew, finally," John said, wiping non-existent sweat from his brow. "Now we have our experimental subject." Damo Alex had intended to leave, but he shelved that plan. My matter isn't urgent," he stammered, putting the letter away guiltily. John nodded at a passing house elf, who produced a cup of rich, sweet hot chocolate. John took it gratefully and said, almost casually, "This is a blood curse patient." "What?" Damo Alex's fatigue vanished. He almost leapt into the dungeon and began examining the snake as if it were an exhibit. "I suspect the blood curse has transformed her body, but it looks like her soul is partially preserved. We can try to start from there." John drank from the hot chocolate. The cloying sweetness would once have annoyed him, but now he drank it in large, grateful gulps. His face, pale before, warmed slightly. Damo Alex noticed the snake had not stirred despite their noise. John finished his cup and said, offhand, "I put her to sleep with a method similar to a stunning spell. She'll probably sleep for a few months." "A few months?" Damo Alex's eyes widened. John coughed and looked sheepish. 2 or 3 months, I'd say." "You must have layered dozens of stunning spells on her, right?" Damo Alex said, horrified. "Dozens would knock even a dragon out for good." John shrugged. He'd used black unicorn powder for the first time and hadn't measured it perfectly. "Maybe. It's actually fine. It gives us time to test properly." Damo Alex agreed. Given the snake's size and temperament, it being unconscious would make experiments easier. As they relaxed a little, John noticed a silver thread of light drifting past his hand, attached to the great snake's body. He reached out and touched it. A mournful, gentle voice slipped into his mind. "Save me. End my suffering." The voice sounded resigned. John paused, then answered aloud, as if speaking into the thread. "I'm trying." The voice trembled in disbelief. "You can hear me?" "Yes," John said. "Please don't give up. I'm trying to free you from the curse." John's tone softened. Having the snake asleep seemed to make the soul within it able to speak. Every blood curse victim was a tragedy, people doomed through no fault of their own. "Trust me," he added. Those 3 words, calm and certain despite his youth, carried weight. The nearly shattered soul inside Nagini surged with a fragile hope. "Who are you?" she asked. "John Wick," he replied. The silver thread in his hand broke like a piece of glass and drifted back to the great snake. The contact ended. John stared at the scattered light, small fragments of a life, dreamlike and heartbreakingly beautiful. Ding, quest triggered, path to redemption, reward, any point 1. Buff Soulwalker. The system triggered a redemption quest, break the blood curse. The notification sharpened John's focus. August 21st. Add some Ashwinder eggs, John suggested. Let's test the blood magic potion again. Although he knew an ancient curse would not be easy to undo, he hadn't expected how difficult it would be. John tossed his coat to a house elf. Damo Alex downed a stimulating potion, the smoke from his ears turning black with frustration. They administered the improved blood magic potion to the sleeping great snake and waited. Nothing changed. Failed again, Damo Alex said, sinking into a chair. The usual polish and reserve were gone. He scratched at his thinning hair, took a quill, and crossed the formula off the parchment. John, exhausted, drained another cup of hot chocolate. It's not just the body, he said quietly. Her soul is being eaten away. Starting on the soul, John, that's forbidden, Damo Alex said, looking up sharply. Throughout history, mad dark wizards pursued the study of the soul. It's evil. No one who went down that road ended well. I know, John replied, rubbing his forehead. But this isn't simple evil for its own sake. I don't think there's any inherently evil magic, only evil wizards. We're friends and partners, Damo Alex said earnestly. I don't want you taking that path. Damo Alex rose, thin to the point of fragility, took a key from the wall, and restored the dungeon's barrier. John followed him out. Sunset had come and gone while they worked. I don't think I can continue working with you on this, Damo Alex said. School starts soon. John had little else prepared for school besides the book Hagrid had sent. Lately, he had seen that silver thread every few days. No one else could. He'd tried to show Damo Alex. He'd even reached for it, but the light passed through Alex's hand. Alex suspected a trick. It seems only those who practice ancient magic can see it, Alex muttered. John had learned the soul's name during their brief communion, Nagini. He absorbed her past, pitiful and cruel. The blood curse was hereditary. Nagini's mother had passed it on, and she'd grown up in a circus. The curse had changed her body, twisted her into this form, and eroded her soul. He felt a chill. Whoever had invented this curse had been both brilliant and monstrous. It was like playing chess against an ancient, implacable mind. Nagini won't last long if I don't do something, he said. I need something that heals the soul. When souls were involved, John thought of unicorn horn, creatures whose very essence could repel and heal dark enchantments. It was a long shot, but it was a place to start. He decided to try it. That night, John slept more than he should have. 2 hours would have sufficed, but he let himself lie a little longer to steady his mind. He woke the next day uncharacteristically late, almost noon, and reached for the Daily Prophet. The headline reminded him of the wider world. Sirius Black was still on the run. Section 96, Rita Skeeter had been all over the story, as sensational as ever, blaming the Azkaban guards for their negligence and praising the tireless work of the Aurors. Her pieces always read like a strong, bitter coffee after a bland meal. Sharp, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. Rita's praise wasn't casual. High-profile coverage meant people noticed who made things happen. Since Rufus Scrimgeour was already his contact, John didn't hesitate to back him. The publicity had done wonders for Scrimgeour. He was giving interview after interview, promising to capture Sirius as quickly as possible and to take whatever measures were needed when the time came. His hardline rhetoric played well, far better than Fudge's vacillations, and Scrimgeour quickly won public favor. John straightened his coat, glanced at his wand, and decided to change his travel plans. Stepping out onto the street, he raised his wand, and a purple, triple-decker bus screeched to a halt outside. After paying his fare, he climbed aboard. The night bus shot through the city, able to squeeze down any road it chose. This contraption has more tricks than Mr. Weasley's car, he thought, inspecting the bus. The inside had clearly been charmed heavily, but it wasn't exactly comfortable. Brass bed frames swayed, and a witch trying to take a drink got doused when her kettle tipped. He was glad it wasn't scalding hot butterbeer. A faceful of that would make for a very unpleasant morning. At the Leaky Cauldron, he slipped into Diagon Alley. The cobbled street was as busy as ever. packed with odd little shops and crooked houses that would have been condemned as dangerous in Muggle neighborhoods. Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor was doing brisk business with a completely new, curious flavor. Some kind of Eastern-inspired tomato and egg ice cream. John hesitated to try it. The customers sampling it seemed mostly older wizards. Maybe young people preferred something less exotic, though he did spot a few wearing Hufflepuff ties. At Quidditch Quality Goods, a brand new firebolt gleamed in the front window. No price listed, only inquire within. With the Quidditch World Cup coming up, the timing was clever. The shopkeeper was loudly claiming that the Irish International Club had already ordered 7. It made John briefly wonder if he should go into the broom business. It looked ridiculously profitable. A familiar head bobbed through the crowd, nudged along by elbows and excitement. John watched sympathetically as the young boy was pushed forward, Harry, no doubt, and hoped he would grow a few inches before the school term started himself. He had his own uniform to get remade. He'd shot up again, and the current one was already too short. At Flourish and Blots, a new banner proclaimed, "I swing a greatsword at Hogwarts," the book displayed in pride of place. A notice on the shelf advertised a buy the full set of Gilderoy Lockhart's books and receive a signed photograph promotion. A few witches who already owned the series dug out their galleons again, just for the signed picture. Seeing the spectacle made John smile. People would buy anything for a bit of celebrity. Inside the shop, behind the entrance glass, a grim-faced assistant stood guard beside a large iron cage, glaring at every passerby. The monster book of monsters were inside, tearing at one another, and whenever a curious young wizard approached, he'd groan, "No," in a weary voice. Hagrid's taste in unusual textbooks must have given the poor assistant nightmares. John was glad Hagrid had only left one this time and bought the rest of his school books. The divination textbook happened to be the same one John had bought before, along with a crystal ball. After grabbing the remaining school supplies he needed, John passed another familiar head in the crowd. Harry again, jostled and smiling despite everything. He paused at a shop window where a delicate, orrery-like model of galactic movements turned inside a glass sphere. "Hermione's birthday is coming up," he murmured, imagining she'd like it. He checked the price, winced, and paid anyway. He apparated home. 10 days remained before classes. Chapter 1 Lalem, Ice Cream, and Twins. Kidnapped unicorn horn had a reputation for healing the soul. John had given a potion made from powdered unicorn horn to the large snake, Nagini, and when he reconnected with her, she was markedly better. "Thank you. I feel much better," Nagini said, her voice steady instead of sorrowful. She no longer wailed into the quiet, and John let out a relieved breath. She sounded lighter in spirit, having regained some of her vitality. "You can speak normally again?" John asked. Nagini's tone shifted, cautious. "I can, for now. Usually, something else takes over." "Something else?" John seized on the phrase. "What is it?" "The blood curse," she said. "It controls my body, pushes my soul to the edge." John frowned. The blood curse had its own consciousness? He pressed gently, and Nagini explained. It was like a parasitic infant. At first it could do little to the host, but over time it grew, slowly taking over. As it matured, the host became less and less in control. Eventually, the curse's own consciousness would dominate the body, and the original soul would be trapped, unable even to act for itself. It was more than a spell. It had the quality of a second soul, an evil presence attached to the living spirit. John's mind raced. If it was attached to the soul, then perhaps the only way to remove it was to sever it directly from the soul. He imagined the procedure, painful beyond imagining, not a physical amputation like Fenrir's arm, but a tearing at the soul itself. One wrong move and the original soul could dissipate completely. "We'll need to prepare thoroughly," he said quietly. The cure would require a blood magic potion to break the binding and a kind of soul surgery while holding the blood curse in stasis. The process would be excruciating. If it's like a permanent transfiguration, maybe animagus rituals could offer a clue. He thought of transfiguration that relied on ritual and potions, like becoming an animagus. A sudden idea lit his eyes. "I'll look for records at Hogwarts," he told Nagini. "There might be an account, some instruction that could help." The silver light in his hand faded as the conversation closed. He found himself oddly eager for school to start. August 31st. One day left. John came back to Diagon Alley early, partly to avoid his father. Watson Wick had been pestering him to conjure a rat that could cook, apparently inspired by Ratatouille, and had even tried to make Tom the dog into a culinary wonder. John had no illusions about Tom's delicate paws. He left a day early rather than endure another ridiculous request. He wanted to escape before Watson's imagination ran any further. At the leaky cauldron, he noticed Tom sulking in his cage. "You miss Big Black?" John asked, patting him. Tom clearly missed his canine celebrity idol, and his despondent face made John want to laugh. "You're still small," he told the dog. "Out there, stray dogs are crafty. You might think you're the boss in front of Fang, but you're nothing to them." Tom blinked, uncomfortably comforted, and promptly trotted over to Basil, who fluttered out of his cage in an attempt to lick at the bird's feathers. A dog with a taste for birds, John could only sigh. He walked to Florian's to try that tomato and egg ice cream again and heard there was now a mapo tofu flavor too. Curiosity, if nothing else, drew him. The shop was quieter than last time. Perhaps the dark cuisines had deterred some customers. Outside the parlor, he spotted a dark-haired girl he recognized. She turned at the same moment and Kran? Her voice snapped a smile out of him. He blinked as she grinned back, two prominent front teeth showing. "Hermione," he said, "why do you look so tanned?" She laughed. The three youngsters were all there, their school books already purchased, chattering and excited for the term to start. John met the trio and watched Hermione sling a heavy bag of books over her shoulder with surprising ease. He suspected she had been exercising in secret. Hermione looked up, a little proud. "I went to France too." "I know. Did you get a tan? Ron isn't nearly as dark as you after coming back from Egypt." Hermione shot him a glare. John rubbed his head and looked at Ron. Ron still had Scabbers with him. After the lottery win, Mr. Weasley had planned to buy Ron a new wand, but he discovered that the wand John had made suited Ron perfectly. Ollivander had even praised it. That saved the Weasleys a tidy sum. Gathered together, they inevitably talked about Harry's latest exploit. Ron laughed about inflating his aunt, but Hermione understood how serious it had been. Harry, too, realized how lucky he'd been not to be expelled, and inwardly grumbled that John had made it sound so casual. Hermione's birthday was coming up, and her parents had given her 10 galleons. She planned to buy an owl like Harry's Hedwig, Ron's Errol, and John's Basil. Ron also needed supplies for his listless Scabbers. The three of them decided to go together. John shrugged. "I'm still waiting for my ice cream." Harry swallowed hard and said with obvious disgust, "John, are you really going to try it?" John nodded. "If you don't try, you'll never know." The three of them wished him luck and left for the magical menagerie. John waited while 3 scoops of different flavors were prepared. He bit into the tomato and egg stir-fry flavor first. It was sour and oddly refreshing. He looked surprised. Not as bad as I thought." He tried another spoonful. It wasn't entirely unbearable. Emboldened, he dug into the mapo tofu flavor next and shoved a large mouthful in. Then he spat it out. "Bloody hell, strawberry mapo tofu. Go to hell." Wincing, he pushed the mapo tofu aside, deeply disappointed. The last scoop, a normal cantaloupe, saved the day. Still annoyed at himself for being the only one disgusted by the flavors, he bought 2 tubs of every unusual flavor, 10 of each, determined no one else would escape them. He put the ice cream in his satchel and froze the satchel with an icy charm, then headed back to the leaky cauldron, only to be intercepted. "John, just in time. We've got a deal. A brilliant deal. You're coming with us." Fred and George's sing-song voices made the plan obvious before they even spoke. No sooner had John stepped out of Diagon Alley than the twins had him hoisted off the ground and were marching deeper into the narrow streets. John noticed they'd passed Gringotts. Ahead lay Nocturne Alley. "Wait, where are you taking me?" he protested. "Going into Nocturne Alley? You're insulting the king of Nocturne Alley," he added for show. Fred and George said nothing in answer, yet smiling mischievously, and carried him straight to a familiar storefront. They looked like 2 proud salesmen. "We got a letter, Silverhand Angel Investment, an idea, a product, and a promising little genius." They produced a leaflet and in perfect unison declared, "That genius is you." John understood immediately. They wanted him to interview for Silverhand Angel Investment. The twins knew his alchemical skills were exceptional. John stared. Interviewing for Silver Hand Angel Investment. Wasn't he, John, practically interviewing himself? You two are only fifth years and already talking about starting a business? High school ambitions indeed. Ever since Mundungus had been warned off, he'd stopped being so brazen. Seeing Johnny Silverhand's ruthless business methods had cowed him. The Little Wizard Fund's window had been handed over from Mundungus to Tang Mi because John needed someone with real business sense. For now, Tang Mi would have to do. Silverhand Johnny's shop had added a service window for Silverhand Angel Investment. Tang Mi sat behind the counter and listened to one stream of wizardly pitches after another, his head aching. John was practically shoved into the chair by the twins. Tang Mi glanced up and his mouth fell open. "We're here to apply for Silverhand Angel Investment," Fred announced. "All we need is 100 galleons," George added, patting John on the shoulders as if he were a paid-up investor. Tang Mi blinked. 100 galleons? The twins cheerfully assumed the investment was just the usual fee. Tang Mi, on the other hand, was incredulous. These two had kidnapped their boss's associate and were asking for only 100 galleons? Didn't they know Johnny Silverhand's resources? Seeing his expression, John quickly improvised. "We're only Hogwarts students with a dream. We still have school, but we'll deliver by owl post." He gave Tang Mi an urgent wink to get rid of the twins. Tang Mi straightened and cleared his throat. "In that case, that amount is fair." "Owl post?" George repeated, eyes alight. "John, you really are a genius. I knew picking you was right. We can sell inside the school." The twins' faces lit up at the idea. John gave Tang Mi a look. Tang Mi nodded, pulled out a form, and smiled. "Then let's draw up a detailed plan. Business model, short-term goals, 3-year targets, main products, and market. We'll reply as soon as possible." The twins cheered, took the form, and handed it straight to John. He stared. Were they opening the shop, or was he? The form was precisely the kind of planning sheet he'd prepared himself. 1-year and 3-year targets, product lines, and primary customers. It would weed out anyone looking to scam money. Now it was in his hands, and his face darkened, so they really expected him to do the work. Silly them. He shoved the parchment back at Fred. "This is your idea. No one will understand it better than you." Glancing at his watch, John remembered he hadn't fed Tom yet. The twins thought that reasonable, thanked him, and carefully put the form away. Mrs. Weasley kept hoping they'd get ministry jobs like their father, but Fred and George preferred a different life. That's why the joke shop plans existed. The 100 galleons was just seed money. They'd truly begin after graduation. Declining the twins' offer to try his new ice creams, John went back to the leaky cauldron. Tom was already tucking into his food, while Basil perched high in the room, eyes narrowed as if dozing, but really watching everything. A scream came from next door. Someone must have opened the Monster Book of Monsters. The Weasleys were all staying at the leaky cauldron. John had been a bit put off by the tavern at first, but its rooms were surprisingly clean inside. As he came out to find something to eat, he ran into Mr. Weasley. "John Wick, thanks for your help with Harry and the others," Mr. Weasley said, shaking his hand. Molly Weasley pressed forward and hugged him, one tall and thin, the other short and plump. The Weasleys' combination of warmth and discipline showed in their 7 well-brought-up children. "You must be hungry. I've got pies fresh from the oven." John loved the house and its inhabitants and rarely enjoyed such hospitality. At the dining table, he saw Hermione and Ron arguing. Hermione's new cat, Crookshanks, had been making improper advances towards Scabbers, which angered Ron. They bickered like a young couple while John watched Crookshanks in Hermione's arms. The cat's face was flat and stern, its ginger fur fluffy and soft, very squeezable. Silently, John took out a dried fish and tossed it toward Crookshanks. The cat snapped it up cleanly. John tossed another. Crookshanks was clever, not like an ordinary cat. John suspected some magical creature bloodline. At dinner, Percy popped in, proudly wearing his head boy badge. The twins loved to tease him, and even Harry and Ron said Percy had the air of a ministry official. Percy saw John and looked genuinely pleased. "John, it's good to see you here." John nodded, took a bite of meat pie, and said with a smile, "Congratulations on becoming head boy." "You deserve a lot of the credit," Percy replied. They exchanged smiles that hinted at a private understanding. The twins murmured to one another, and the three youngsters exchanged glances, unsure what help John had given. After dinner, John returned to his room, but he stopped when he heard raised voices outside. Percy's. Opening the door, he found Harry standing there as well. Percy's prefect badge was missing, and he was loudly accusing Ron. Ron looked bewildered. He swore he didn't know who had taken it, and the medicine he'd bought for Scabbers was gone too. Harry immediately volunteered to fetch the medicine and hurried downstairs. John watched for a moment, convinced the twins were behind it. Who else would prank Percy? He remembered he had left his glass sphere downstairs and went to fetch it. From the stairwell, he saw Harry leaning toward a single room, surreptitiously eavesdropping. "I never thought the Great Chosen One would take up eavesdropping," John said. Harry looked caught. John tried not to judge by appearances. With those thick eyebrows and big eyes, he'd never have suspected it either. After getting the sphere, John turned and caught Harry crouched behind the bar. The Weasleys emerged. Arthur gave John an awkward nod as they passed. Once they were gone, John walked over and asked quietly, "What are you doing?" Harry was torn. He'd overheard the Weasleys talking. Sirius had escaped from Azkaban and might be trying to get to Hogwarts to find him. That terrified Harry, but his pride fought fear. He clenched his fists and told himself he wouldn't be frightened. He'd also noticed why the Ministry hadn't punished him. Fudge had personally come to check on him, apparently relieved he was alive. Squatting by the bar, Harry asked in a small voice, "Do I really look that cowardly to people?" Mrs. Weasley had been trying not to scare him with the whole truth, and Mr. Weasley was worried he might act rashly. John looked at the visibly upset boy and, a little at a loss for words, said patiently, "If you want me to explain why people might think that, tell me what you heard, and I'll tell you the truth." Harry repeated what he'd heard, Sirius muttering about Hogwarts, possibly coming out specifically to find him. John rubbed his chin. Given Harry's build and age, an encounter with Sirius was possible in the abstract, but Mrs. Weasley's worries had weight too. Hogwarts had Dumbledore, and even Voldemort would pause before attacking there. Looking at Harry, John said calmly, "Don't scare yourself. Knowing or not knowing this won't change anything now." Harry agreed. The real point was that Sirius was wanted. The Ministry had sent Aurors and Azkaban had its own guards searching. With so many people after him, Sirius shouldn't be able to get near Hogwarts. Comforted by that, Harry went into the room the Weasleys had been in to fetch Scabbers' medicine. John and Harry went back upstairs and found the twins in mid-prank, having transformed Percy's badge into a comically oversized head. It wasn't the first time. John shrugged it off and returned to his room to rest. Early the next morning, they prepared to go to the station. John had thought of apparating, but with so many people around, he accepted Mr. Weasley's offer instead. The wizard driving the Weasley car was an Auror at a glance. The others were efficient and visibly alert. The Ministry had cleared a path for Harry, and John was not often granted such a privileged escort. At the station, Mr. Weasley stayed with Harry and went through the barrier to Platform 9 and 3/4 himself. John and Percy walked through together, chatting. "This year feels like it's going to be another unsettled one," Percy said, in the small, official voice he favored now. "And these things always seem to happen to Harry," he added. Percy wasn't wrong. John nodded, glanced at the Ministry personnel moving through the station, and said, "We can't let our guard down, not even on the train." They boarded and went different ways. Prefects and heads of houses had designated compartments and had to move about to keep order. As John headed for his compartment, the twins came up from behind. George leaned in and asked loudly, "What did His Excellency Percy tell you?" Fred tapped his temple and grinned. Maybe he told John to befriend him. John thought their relationship with Percy was odd. The twins looked eager. "You two want something again, don't you?" he said warily. They didn't hide it. One on each side, they practically carried John into a compartment. Lee Jordan was already there, grinning and nursing a pet spider. "Hey, no pranking Slytherin here." Lee protested when the twins dragged John in. "Shut up, Lee," the twins snapped good-humoredly as they settled John between them. John was confused. Hadn't he already approved the twins' owl post scheme the night before? Their eyes shone. George beamed at John. John, the whole owl post idea is brilliant. Fred put on an earnest face. If you can tell us how to do it, you'll be the cleverest Slytherin in the school. John didn't hand out ideas for free. What's in it for me? He asked. The twins straightened as if making a business pitch. We'll share things with you, one said. Money, the other added. Or pranks, they finished, trading their usual mischief for sincerity. John considered it. The twins weren't academic stars, but they had a knack for alchemy and inventions. Their joke products kept appearing around the school. They could be useful suppliers for the Silver Hand Johnny shop in the future. Fine, he said. Not money. I want a club. You two can join. It's a deal, they chorused. Lee Jordan, feeling left out, tried to join in. What kind of club? I want in, too. As long as you don't have a problem with Slytherins, John said, nonchalant. The mention of Slytherins was enough to dampen Lee's enthusiasm. He was a Gryffindor through and through and promptly lost interest. The train pulled out. Percy walked past the compartment later, and the twins complained about him again. The four of them squeezed into 3 seats, cramped but lively. The twins talked of opening a joke shop. Lee dreamed of continuing as a Quidditch commentator. John would have liked to tell him that his biased style might put audiences off, but the conversation was friendly enough. After a while, the train slowed to a halt. John frowned and looked out the window. They hadn't reached Hogwarts. Students filed out of compartments to see what was happening. The window glass fogged over as a cold, visible breath seemed to hit it. Why did it suddenly get so cold? George asked, rubbing his arms. Fred spotted Malfoy's pale sneer moving along the platform outside with his cronies. The train lights began to flicker and go out. Screams rose from other carriages. Someone flung the compartment door open. Whatever was boarding had already begun. George, switch seats with me, someone hissed. John noticed something drifting past the window and shifted his stance. Cold poured in. Malfoy burst into the compartment in a panic. Crabbe and Goyle shoved in behind him. John was jostled out into the corridor. Doors were being opened one after another, revealing figures in ragged cloaks. Their skin looked as if it had rotted, their hands scabbed, their clothes foul. Dementors, Azkaban's guards. The creatures moved down the aisle, opening doors and hovering at thresholds. The young witches and wizards inside seemed frozen, as if all hope had been leached from the carriage. John felt the pressure change. Anything good inside him was being sucked away. Several Dementors turned toward him and started to glide over. They were nearer now. The air tasted of ash and cold. The person you want isn't here, one of them rasped hollowly, and it moved closer. Malfoy pushed, eyes wide. John, get in! John didn't hesitate. He raised his wand in a single, frolling, precise motion. Expecto Patronum. A bright, silvery mist shot from his wand. Where it touched the encroaching cold, the Dementors recoiled as if from a living thing. The mist coalesced, and under John's continuing concentration, formed the shape of an albatross, huge, gleaming wings beating steadily. The albatross surged down the corridor, passing in front of each compartment. Every Dementor it touched gave a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a human noise, and then they were driven back, shuddering and retreating out of the carriage. At the far end of the train, another Patronus had been cast. Silver light blossomed there, and a few of the Dementors that had approached were seen backing away. In a compartment near the back, a tired but startled man in mended clothes stood white-faced as the silver albatross swept past. Professor Lupin, stunned, watching John's Patronus glide away. He hadn't expected anyone else on the train to be able to cast a Patronus charm, let alone someone who could produce a full corporeal Patronus. The Dementors were driven off the train, chased away until they dispersed. The younger students who had endured the ordeal stumbled out, hearts racing, grateful to be alive. They watched as a shining albatross Patronus circled back and hovered protectively around John. You did it, John. You're a hero, Lee Jordan cheered. John scowled. Those Dementors had been outrageously bold to come onto the train. If the Ministry or Dumbledore allowed them to take up a post at the school, it wasn't just Sirius who would be in danger. Every student could be at risk. Percy arrived then with the prefects, just in time to see the albatross dissipate. John said sharply, Dementors. They feed on happiness. Check everyone. See if anyone's hurt. Percy immediately understood and set the prefects to inspect every carriage. They found only one student unconscious, Harry Potter. "Stupid, cowardly Potter," Malfoy sneered without restraint. John glanced at him. The hypocrisy stung. Malfoy had barged into other people's carriages earlier himself. John tapped the side of the carriage with his wand and activated a super sense spell. The answer made the hair on his arms stand up. The Dementors hadn't disappeared entirely. They were hovering above the train in a dark, churning mass. Then a brilliant, fiery Patronus in the shape of a phoenix streaked past and scattered the creatures for good. Dumbledore had intervened. The train began moving again. The Weasley twins shoved Malfoy and his cronies out of the carriage, and off they tumbled. John felt uneasy and joined the prefect patrol. No one objected. If anything, his presence reassured them. At Hogsmeade Station, he saw a solemn Rubus Hagrid, who evidently already knew about the Dementors. John nodded and received a guarded, grateful look from the giant. Chapter 114. 2 professors and an exchange student. The thestral-drawn carriages gave 1 or 2 lurches as they made the last stretch toward Hogwarts. Daphne squeezed up next to John as soon as she saw him. Whatever awkwardness they'd had last term seemed to have melted away. Malfoy arrived with his usual pair of hangers-on and, true to form, shoved the Weasley twins out of the carriage before taking their place. The thestral looked weary under the extra weight of Goyle and Crabbe. "Fainted, Potter? So Longbottom was telling the truth?" Malfoy taunted as they climbed out. John watched him with a private smile. Malfoy had crashed into other people's carriages early on, so his jeering felt especially hypocritical. The worst was that Professor McGonagall instantly singled Harry out and called him aside. Now the whole school would know Potter had fainted on the train. Seated in the Great Hall, John noticed a tall figure leaning in the shadows at the staff table, someone whose silhouette stood out. Professor Kettleburn had long since retired. Hagrid had taken over care of magical creatures, which wasn't news. What surprised John was the other new face. Remus Lupin. Lupin's clothes were clean and fitting, thanks in part to the clothes John had provided to the security team. Yet his gray hair and the deep lines around his eyes spoke of a hard life. There was a tired, watchful quality to his expression that made John curious. Using the Patronus had left him lighter on his feet in one way, but drained in another. His happiest memories had been of food, and those memories were what he'd used to power the charm. He was hungry, really hungry. With Professor McGonagall absent, Professor Flitwick stood on a stool and continued the sorting. Just as everyone thought the last first year had been settled, Flitwick called one more name. Heinrich Edgar. A pale figure stepped from the shadows. He was clearly no first year. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Dumbledore introduced him. Heinrich Edgar is an exchange student from Durmstrang. He will spend this year at Hogwarts. Durmstrang, just the name, made some of the more nervous students exchange looks. It was a well-known school, notorious for its hard approach and for teaching certain darker branches of magic. The sorting hat barely touched Heinrich's head before it cried, "Flippin'." Malfoy brightened and waved him over. John remembered the letter Heinrich had sent him. Could this be what it meant? Heinrich, 2 years older than Malfoy, took a slow step toward the Slytherin table. Malfoy rose, expecting some kind of greeting, but Heinrich simply frowned and ordered him to move aside. Then he crossed the hall and sat down in Malfoy's place, pale as if he rarely saw sunlight. Their eyes met. Heinrich said flatly, "I told you we'd meet again." "I didn't expect you'd be an exchange student," John admitted, offering a hand. "Welcome. Edgar follows the strong. I will follow the strong." Heinrich said without a trace of apology. It was the pride of a house used to serving power, lieutenants rather than leaders. John smiled faintly. "Then you'll need to be able to keep up." Heinrich returned the smile. Malfoy, however, was reduced to fury and a little despair. His promised relative had not only taken his seat, but seemed content to steal his place in the social order as well. He shoved Goyle aside and planted himself elsewhere at the table. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned, they arrived during Dumbledore's introductions. Ron nudged Harry and whispered, "I'll bet a sickle that he's a vampire." Harry's eyebrows rose. He had never heard of Durmstrang before, and Ron's description of the school, especially the bit about dark arts being taught, made him instantly suspicious. Dumbledore introduced the two new members of staff properly. Professor Lupin will be joining us, and Professor Hagrid will be taking over care of magical creatures. The trio gaped. Hagrid as professor drew their shared astonishment. Then Dumbledore's tone turned serious. Our school has recently welcomed Dementors from Azkaban. They have been sent by the Ministry to perform duties here, as you are all aware from their inspection of the Hogwarts Express. He paused, and his gaze found John, who was internally grumbling about the still empty serving trays. I would remind you, they are very dangerous. They are stationed at the entrances to the school. No one is to leave without permission. No trick, prank, or disguise, not even an invisibility cloak, can fool a Dementor. That final line landed on Harry like a cold hand. Once Dumbledore finished, the part John liked best began, the food. Mountains of it appeared on the golden plates. John speared a sausage, and then another, and then moved from dish to dish like a man starved for weeks. Heinrich, determined not to be outdone, abandoned any aristocratic decorum and ate with similar urgency until he suddenly turned pale and pushed his plate away. After a little while more of frantic chewing, the Durmstrang student had to be carried out to the hospital wing. He'd simply eaten too much on his first day. The whole episode prompted a few snickers and many whispered jokes, wondering how unappetizing Durmstrang's food must be. Cutlery clinked less and less as the meal wound down. John polished off the last piece of chicken, wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, and sat back. Daphne watched him with a faint glow of admiration. There was something attractive about someone who ate with gusto. After the feast, John went to congratulate Hagrid. The Golden Trio were with him. Hagrid embraced John like an old friend. "Thanks to you, John. I got lots of good ideas for my lessons." Ron scowled at John, half in gratitude and half in irritation. "You knew already? Why didn't you tell us?" John shrugged. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Ron grumbled, but let it drop, though he still looked mournfully at his torn trousers. The first day ended uneventfully. John went back to his dorm to find Basil and Tom already settled in. He lingered only a little before slipping out again. He hadn't forgotten the thing that mattered most to him right now. He left the dormitory and made his way to the room of requirement. From there, he tried to find material on the nature of souls. Gryffindor's own collections turned out to be sparse on that subject. There had always been a certain reluctance among Gryffindors to dig too deeply into such things, so he pushed farther. Using paths that only a few knew, he reached a hidden archive in the Forbidden Forest associated with Slytherin's more private holdings. There he found a trove of manuscripts, studies on souls, on embedding pieces of oneself into objects, and even documents on Horcruxes. These texts bore the marks of long scrutiny and fierce disagreement. Slytherin's own scholars, it seemed, had not been kind to the idea of Horcruxes. Chapter 115, Screen Splitter and Death Prophecy. Thinking about it, it made sense. How could Salazar Slytherin, one of the four founders, have been content to live humbly like an insect? Pride would have prevented him from settling for mere survival, which explained why he abandoned his research into Horcruxes. Did Lord Voldemort learn about Horcruxes here? John wondered. It seemed possible. The records in the chamber confirmed only the existence of Horcruxes, not a full method. What mattered to John was the separation of the soul, and the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets was packed with data. No wonder Salazar had clashed with Godric Gryffindor. This archive was even more extensive than the restricted section. Old knowledge isn't always better, but Salazar's talent showed. Much of it wasn't merely relevant, it was brilliant. John learned a great deal, especially about soul magic. Time and soul, two forbidden topics. There was a rumor in the wizarding world that anyone who probed those things met a tragic end. John didn't return to his dormitory. He slept in the chamber, a dry sponge greedily absorbing every scrap of learning. The next morning, he left the chamber for classes. The downside of taking every subject revealed itself at 9 a.m., when divination, Muggle studies, and arithmancy all clashed. He'd expected the headache. He wondered how Hermione had managed her schedule. In the Great Hall, he met the newly enrolled Heinrich and Draco Malfoy. It turned out Malfoy had chosen arithmancy, so John cheerfully handed him a constellation badge. Malfoy was stunned, then delighted. He hadn't expected such quick approval. Don't get the wrong idea. John said before Malfoy could float away on his ego. Wear it to class so I can listen in. John planned to use the 9 interconnected badges to split his attention between classes, essentially a magical split screen. Malfoy deflated. Heinrich, who'd come from Durmstrang and already had a reputation for strength, peered at the badge and asked, "Give me one." John considered it. Heinrich had proven himself. He belonged among the top students. "Here," John said, and pinned a badge on him personally. Malfoy watched, green with envy. "Why does he get one?" he demanded. "He's strong enough," John replied, blunt and final. Malfoy had no comeback. Word spread. Heinrich immediately dueled several Slytherins. He wasn't as effortlessly skilled as John, but no Slytherin could match him. Malfoy tried to intervene and teach Heinrich a lesson, but he ended up petrified in the common room for hours. Slytherin House, already influenced by John, became more belligerent. Duels decided status, and strength mattered above old bloodlines. The old pure-blood ideology started to give way to raw power. After sorting out arithmancy, John needed someone to cover Muggle studies. Daphne volunteered, her eyes fixed on the badge. John gave her one. She smiled a beautiful, grateful smile. With that taken care of, John headed to divination. He'd been given a seer's blessing that hadn't yet manifested. Perhaps Trelawney's class would trigger it. There were small skirmishes at breakfast, too. Because Heinrich had a vampire-like pallor, the Weasley twins had slipped garlic essence into his milk. Heinrich took a sip, spat it out, and drew his wand. The twins relied on their knowledge of the castle to get away ahead of him. John only shook his head and produced a mapo tofu, flavored ice cream from his satchel as an offering to Malfoy. Malfoy took a bite and made a face as if he'd eaten spoiled tripe. John shrugged and left for class. The divination classroom sat in the astronomy tower, a place John had never been. He consulted the Marauder's map and found the trapdoor above. The map even showed 3 Hermiones moving in the corridors. He climbed the ladder and found the room already filling with students. The classroom felt less like a classroom and more like an attic tea house. Small round tables, chintz armchairs, poofs, heavy curtains drawn shut, lamps shrouded in deep red. Every surface was bathed in a hazy crimson. The air was close, and the tea steaming in a copper kettle smelled bitter and strong. A fire roared in the mantelpiece. John found a seat and saw Professor Sybil Trelawney lurking in the shadows. She fitted every cliché of a diviner: gaunt, huge magnifying spectacles that made her eyes enormous, layers of beads and chains, bracelets and rings clinking on her hands. Though she could seem like a charlatan, John knew she could be unnervingly accurate. She had noticed something about him. Trelawney glided forward and fixed her magnified eyes on John. "Child, I sense talent," she said in a thin, otherworldly voice. The classroom stilled. She placed her hands over John's eyelids. "Relax. Reach out. Your aura is bright. You can see far." The students leaned in. Following Trelawney's guidance, John relaxed and let his celestial eye open. Colors flowed behind his eyelids. "Tell me, what do you see?" she urged, lifting her hands. John's foresight flickered into place. "I see Hermione and the others coming," he said. At that moment, the trio entered. The room murmured. Harry stared at Professor Trelawney. She looked monstrously beetle-like, and then at John. "You truly have immense talent," Trelawney cried. Harry was puzzled. Neville, full of admiration, said, "John predicted you'd come in." Hermione, ever rational, wrinkled her nose. "John knew we were coming. We met him in the Great Hall earlier." She didn't trust divination. She trusted what she could see. Harry and Ron exchanged skeptical looks. Trelawney, however, was exultant. This was her chance to prove she wasn't always a fraud. She guided John again. "Relax. Let the celestial eye take you farther." John followed her voice and sank into the ethereal state. He seemed to see many things at once. Then, eyes wide and white, pressure radiating from him, he grabbed Trelawney's hands and spoke in a voice that rose into something like a chant. At the full moon, the wolf's howl joins the dog's wail. The rat flees. Old acquaintances meet again from afar. Those ignorant of the truth will lose their shins, and those who violate taboos will be submerged by a black tide. A chill ran through the room. When John released her, Trelawney gasped for air. "Sorry, Professor," he said, blinking back into himself. "I didn't mean to." She forced a smile. "It's all right, child. You succeeded." The tension broke and the room erupted. Submerged by a black tide. Sounds like a death prophecy. John Wick made a death prophecy. Is it real or a trick? Whatever it is, it's John Wick. The whispers grew into excited chatter that drowned out Trelawney's attempts to restore order. Even Hermione, unimpressed by divination, found herself unsettled. Harry, thinking of the great black dog, frowned at the line about the dog's wail. The class had provided enough gossip for the whole school. News of John's ominous prophecy spread like wildfire. Chapter 116, Hagrid's First Lesson and Buckbeak. In the subsequent divination sessions, everyone showed unprecedented interest.